The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered tanks at the National Armor and Cavalry Museum at Fort Benning. The air carried the familiar scent of metal, oil, and history that Colonel Jack Sullivan had breathed for over 5 decades of his life. At 72, his ramrod posture and vigilant eyes betrayed his age only to those who knew to look for the subtle stiffness in his movements, earned through years of climbing in and out of steel beasts. And here, gentlemen, we have the M60A3 Patton. Sullivan announced to the small group of young officers following him through the museum's vast collection. His voice still carried the commanding tone honed through years of barking orders over the roar of engines and gunfire. The backbone of our armored divisions during the Cold War. I spent most of my early career in various models of this 30-ton workhorse. The 6 lieutenants, fresh from the Armor Basic Officer Leaders course, nodded respectfully. They were young, impossibly young to Sullivan's eyes, born after the Berlin Wall fell, after Desert Storm, after everything that had shaped his world. "Sir," one of them spoke up, Lieutenant Pearson, according to his nameplate, "we've seen all the main battle tanks. But what about the lesser-known vehicles, the ones that never made it to full production?" Sullivan paused, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. "You asking about the odd ducks, son? The experiments in the might-have-beens?" "Yes, sir. The failures can teach us as much as the successes, right?" Sullivan's gaze drifted to a far corner of the museum where a canvas-covered object sat partially hidden in shadows, almost forgotten. Something most visitors would walk past without a second glance. "Not all of them were failures, Lieutenant. Some just never got their moment in the spotlight." Sullivan gestured toward the mysterious shape. "Follow me." He led them to the corner where the object sat undisturbed. No placard, no information panel, just a dusty canvas covering something roughly the size of a large golf cart. Sullivan gripped the edge of the canvas with his calloused hand. "What I'm about to show you isn't in your textbooks. Most of your instructors have never even heard of it." With a theatrical flourish that betrayed his pride, Sullivan pulled away the cover. The officers gathered closer, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. Before them sat what appeared to be a miniature tank, barely large enough for 2 men. Its angular armor gleamed dully under the museum lights, its low profile giving it the appearance of a predatory insect ready to pounce. "Gentlemen, meet the Wildcat Mark III, one of America's forgotten warriors." Lieutenant Pearson knelt to examine the small vehicle. "Sir, with all due respect, this looks more like a toy than a combat vehicle." Sullivan's laugh was short and sharp. "That's exactly what I said the first time I saw it, son. Back in 19s. He ran his hand along the vehicle's hull, his touch reverent, like greeting an old friend. "This little machine and I have a history, one that's never been fully told." The young officers exchanged glances, sensing a story. They gathered around as Sullivan lowered himself onto a nearby bench, his knees protesting the movement. "If you've got time, I'll tell you about a project that almost changed the face of armored warfare and why you've never heard of it until today." They nodded eagerly, pulling up chairs. Sullivan took a deep breath, his mind traveling back across the decades to a different America, a different world. It was the summer of 1976. The nation was celebrating its bicentennial, and I was a young captain stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. Summer 1976. Captain Jack Sullivan wiped the sweat from his brow as the merciless Texas sun beat down on the M60A1 tank range. Through his binoculars, he watched the line of tanks advancing across the training ground, their engines growling in the sweltering heat. "Target acquisitions still too slow on Tank 4, he muttered into his radio. "Reynolds, tell your gunner to get his head out of his ass. The Soviets won't give him a second chance if this were the Fulda Gap." The summer heat rippled over the range as Sullivan watched the tanks maneuver through their exercises. 3 years of this now. 3 years of training fresh-faced lieutenants and sergeants, preparing them for a Soviet invasion that seemed simultaneously imminent and hypothetical. Sullivan checked his watch. He'd promised Linda he'd call before Michael's baseball game. His son was 12 now, growing up in fragments between deployments and training rotations. The boy's face was changing every time Sullivan came home, becoming more a stranger with each passing month. "Captain Sullivan?" A young specialist approached, saluting crisply. "Colonel Matheson needs you in the HQ, sir, immediately." Sullivan frowned. Matheson rarely interrupted live-fire exercises. "Tell Major Davis to take over. I'll be back when I can." The headquarters building offered blessed relief from the heat. Sullivan adjusted his uniform as he approached the colonel's office, wondering what emergency had prompted the summons. "Enter," came the response to his knock. Colonel Matheson wasn't alone. An older man in the uniform of a brigadier general sat across from him, his chest adorned with rows of ribbons that told the story of a career spanning from World War II through Vietnam. "Captain Sullivan reporting as ordered, sir." Sullivan snapped to attention, his eyes fixed forward. Matheson nodded. "At ease, Captain. This is Brigadier General William Harrington. He's here from the Pentagon with a special assignment." Sullivan shifted his gaze to the general, instantly recognizing the name. William Eagle Harrington was a legend in armored warfare circles. He'd commanded a tank battalion under Patton in Europe, pioneered new armored tactics in Korea, and had been an influential voice in tank development since the 1950s. "It's an honor, General." Sullivan maintained his professional demeanor, though his curiosity was piqued. Harrington studied Sullivan with piercing blue eyes that had lost none of their intensity with age. "Your record is impressive, Captain. Combat experience in Vietnam with the 11th Armored Cavalry. Silver Star for actions near An Loc. Top of your class at armor school. The reports say you have an intuitive understanding of armored warfare that can't be taught." Sullivan remained silent, unsure how to respond to the recitation of his career. "I'll get straight to the point," Harrington continued, rising from his chair. "I'm putting together a special project team, and I want you on it. Colonel Matheson has already approved your temporary reassignment." "May I ask the nature of this project, sir?" Harrington smiled thinly. "Not here. You're to report to Building 87734 on the North Range at ISO 700 tomorrow. Temporary quarters have been arranged. The assignment is classified top secret. You'll be briefed fully upon arrival." He extended his hand. "This could be a significant opportunity for your career, Captain." Sullivan shook the general's hand, his mind racing with questions. "I'll be there, sir." "Good. One more thing," Harrington added. "Don't discuss this with anyone, not even your family. As far as anyone needs to know, you're on a special training assignment. Understood?" "Yes, sir." After the general departed, Colonel Matheson offered no additional information, only saying, "Harrington specifically requested you, Sullivan. Whatever this is, it's important. Don't screw it up." Sullivan nodded, his thoughts already turning to Linda and Michael. Another broken promise, another absence to explain away. The North Range of Fort Hood housed several nondescript buildings used for various classified projects. Building 87734 was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, with armed MPs at the gate. Sullivan presented his orders and ID to a stone-faced sergeant who checked them against his clipboard. "You're on the list, sir. Park there and proceed to the main entrance." The building's exterior gave no hint of its purpose, a plain concrete structure with few windows. Inside, however, Sullivan found a hive of activity. Civilians in lab coats mingled with military personnel. Large blueprint tables dominated the center of the main room, while smaller offices ringed the perimeter. "Captain Sullivan," General Harrington emerged from one of the offices. "Right on time. Come with me." Harrington led him to a conference room where three others waited: an older non-commissioned officer with grease-stained hands, a young lieutenant with the polished appearance of West Point, and a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes. "Your team," Harrington announced. "Master Sergeant Raymond Wilkins, our head mechanic with 30 years experience on everything with tracks or wheels." The sergeant nodded gruffly. "Most call me Wrench, sir." "Lieutenant Marcus Daniels, top of his class in engineering at West Point." The young officer stood and offered his hand. "A pleasure, Captain." "And Dr. Eleanor Winters from DARPA, one of our leading experts in lightweight armor composites." The woman smiled professionally. "Captain Sullivan, I've heard good things." Sullivan acknowledged each introduction, noting the diverse backgrounds. Whatever this project was, it required multiple specialties. "Please, everyone, be seated," Harrington said, closing the door. "What I'm about to share doesn't leave this room." He dimmed the lights and activated a slide projector. The first image showed a small armored vehicle, unlike any tank Sullivan had seen in U.S. inventory. "This is the Wildcat Mark III, Harrington began. "A light reconnaissance and fire support vehicle designed for high mobility, air transportability, and most importantly, low cost." He clicked through more slides showing the vehicle from various angles. It was tiny compared to an M60 with a low profile and what appeared to be a modified machine gun mount. The Wildcat is based on a concept that dates back several decades but has been updated with modern components. It uses a commercial Chrysler 225 Slant 6 engine, aluminum composite armor developed by Dr. Winter's team, and can be armed with a Browning M2 50 caliber machine gun that can be removed for ground use if necessary. Sullivan studied the images with professional interest. What's the purpose, sir? The M113 already serves as our armored personnel carrier, and we have scout variants. Harrington nodded. Good question. The M113 costs over $100,000 per unit and requires significant maintenance. The Wildcat can be produced for approximately $65,000, requires minimal maintenance due to its commercial engine components, and can be airlifted by smaller aircraft. But most importantly, he paused for effect. We're not building it for ourselves. The room fell silent as the implications settled. The Soviet Union is expanding its influence globally, Harrington continued. Our allies, particularly those in NATO's southern flank and developing nations friendly to our interests, need affordable armored vehicles to counter Soviet-supplied equipment. The Wildcat is designed to be simple enough to be manufactured and maintained in countries with limited industrial capacity. Dr. Winters added, the armor system is revolutionary. Lightweight but capable of stopping 14.5mm rounds, which is the standard Soviet heavy machine gun. Your mission, Harrington addressed the team, is to complete development, conduct field trials, and prepare a comprehensive evaluation within 4 months. If successful, we'll move to limited production by year's end. Sullivan processed the information. The concept made strategic sense, but something felt off. Sir, why the secrecy for what's essentially a foreign military sales project? Harrington exchanged glances with Dr. Winters before responding. There are elements within the Pentagon who believe our focus should remain exclusively on heavy armor, like the XM1 program. They see projects like this as distractions. Additionally, if certain details about the Wildcat's design became known to Soviet intelligence, it could compromise aspects of our more advanced programs. Not entirely convincing, Sullivan thought, but he kept his reservations to himself. Captain Sullivan will serve as project leader and test commander, Harrington announced. Lieutenant Daniels will handle engineering modifications. Sergeant Wilkins, you're in charge of maintenance and practical improvements. Dr. Winters will continue refining the armor system. Any questions? Lieutenant Daniels raised his hand. Sir, with respect, I was told I'd be joining the XM1 development team. This seems less critical to national security. Sullivan noticed Harrington's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. The Wildcat is a priority project with direct oversight from the Secretary of Defense, Harrington stated firmly. Your career will benefit more from success here than being a junior member on the XM1 team, Lieutenant. Daniels nodded, though his disappointment remained evident. If there are no further questions, Captain Sullivan will familiarize himself with the prototype this afternoon. We begin field trials tomorrow at 800. Dismissed. As the others filed out, Harrington motioned for Sullivan to remain. Your thoughts, Captain? Speak freely. Sullivan considered his words carefully. It's an interesting concept, sir, but I'm wondering why someone of your stature is personally overseeing what appears to be a relatively simple project. Harrington smiled. Perceptive, walk with me. They exited the conference room and proceeded down a corridor to a large hangar area where the Wildcat prototype sat under bright lights. Up close, it was even smaller than Sullivan had imagined, barely reaching his chest in height. This project is personal for me, Sullivan, Harrington said quietly. In '44, I lost half my tank battalion in the Ardennes because our Shermans couldn't navigate the narrow forest roads quickly enough to outmaneuver German armor. Later in Korea, we had the opposite problem, with tanks too heavy for the primitive bridges. Vietnam taught us that even our light armor was often too heavy for the terrain. He placed a hand on his Wildcat's hull. Throughout my career, I've watched us build bigger, heavier tanks while our potential battlefields become more diverse. The Soviets understand this, which is why they've developed an entire spectrum of armored vehicles, from heavy tanks to light reconnaissance vehicles. Sullivan nodded. The logic was sound. But there's more, Harrington continued. The next war won't necessarily be in Central Europe. It might be in Africa, South America, or Southeast Asia, fought by our allies with equipment we provide. The Wildcat represents a strategic capability gap we need to fill. Sullivan circled the vehicle, taking in its compact dimensions. How does it perform? That's what you're here to determine. On paper, it's impressive. 50 miles per hour on roads, 30 cross-country, range of 200 miles. Two-man crew. But it needs a commander who understands both its potential and limitations. Harrington fixed Sullivan with an intense stare. Someone who won't just see a small tank, but a new tactical tool. Sullivan met the general's gaze. I understand, sir. Good, because there is significant opposition to this project. The heavy armor proponents see it as resource diversion. The procurement officers don't like its simplicity because simple means fewer contracts. You'll face resistance. Nothing new there, sir. Harrington smiled. No, I suppose not. I read your combat reports from Vietnam. You have a knack for making the best of limited resources. He checked his watch. The technical manuals are in your office. The prototype is fueled and ready for inspection. I suggest you get acquainted with your new command. After Harrington departed, Sullivan approached the Wildcat with professional curiosity. Its angular front armor sloped sharply, maximizing deflection capability. The driver's position was front left, commander gunner front right, with a central engine compartment behind them. The machine gun mount on top was simple but appeared effective, protected by a small gun shield. Not much to look at, is it? Sullivan turned to find Sergeant Wilkins approaching, wiping his hands on a rag. I've seen smaller, Sullivan replied diplomatically. No, you haven't, Wilkins chuckled, unless you count toys, but this little beast might surprise you. He patted the vehicle affectionately. Chrysler engine's basically a modified car motor, but it'll push this lightweight frame faster than you'd believe. Maintenance is simple too. Any shade tree mechanic could keep it running. Sullivan nodded. What's your assessment, Sergeant? Honest opinion. Wilkins considered for a moment. It's not a main battle tank, and it doesn't pretend to be. It's a specific tool for a specific job. Low profile, fast, simple. I worked with something similar in the Pacific in '45, a light tank we used for recon. Had its uses. He studied Sullivan. You saw action in Vietnam, right? With the Black Horse Regiment? That's right, M48s mostly. Big difference from this. Wilkins gestured at the Wildcat. But I bet there were times when something smaller and faster would have been useful in those jungles. Sullivan's mind flashed to memories of tank columns restricted to the few roads wide enough to accommodate them, making perfect targets for ambushes. More than once, he admitted. That's what the general sees in this, Wilkins said. Options. Later that evening, Sullivan sat in his temporary quarters reviewing the technical specifications of the Wildcat. The more he read, the more intrigued he became. The vehicle was indeed unusual by American standards, emphasizing mobility and economy over firepower and protection. Its closest analog in U.S. inventory was the M114 reconnaissance vehicle, but even that was significantly larger and more complex. The Wildcat was designed for simplicity, with mechanical controls rather than hydraulic or electric systems where possible. Even the transmission was essentially a modified, heavy-duty truck gearbox. This approach meant fewer specialized parts and easier maintenance, critical factors for countries with limited technical capabilities. Sullivan's phone rang, interrupting his study. Sullivan, he answered. Jack, it's Linda. His wife's voice sent a pang of guilt through him. He'd meant to call before Michael's game. Linda, I'm sorry. This new assignment came up suddenly and... Save it, Jack. Her tone was tired rather than angry. Michael pitched 3 innings today. They won 6-2. Sullivan closed his eyes. That's great. How'd he do? He struck out 5 batters. The coach said he has a natural arm. A pause. He looked for you in the stands. The familiar guilt tightened in Sullivan's chest. I'll make it up to him. This assignment shouldn't be more than a few months. That's what you said about the last one. Another pause. When are you coming home? Even just for a weekend? I don't know yet. It's a classified project. I can't say much. You never can, Linda said softly. Michael's been having trouble at school again. Fighting. Sullivan sighed. Put him on the phone. He's at Tommy's house. I'll have him call you tomorrow. After exchanging a few more strained pleasantries, Sullivan hung up, the weight of his family's disappointment settling on his shoulders. He turned back to the technical manuals, burying himself in work as he'd done countless times before. The following morning dawned clear and hot, typical Texas summer weather. Sullivan arrived at the facility early, finding Dr. Winters already at work in her laboratory. Good morning, Captain, she greeted him without looking up from her microscope. Ready for your first drive? Looking forward to it. I was reviewing the armor specifications last night. Impressive density to protection ratio. This caught her attention. She looked up, her expression suggesting surprise that a tank officer would understand the technical aspects of her work. It's an aluminum ceramic composite, she explained, warming to the subject. Lighter than traditional steel armor, but capable of defeating most machine gun rounds. The ceramic plates absorb and disperse energy, while the aluminum backing catches fragments. She pointed to a cross-section sample. The composition is my own development, refined from concepts that emerged in the late 1960s. Sullivan examined the sample with interest. How does it compare to the armor on our current vehicles? It's not designed to stop tank rounds like the composite armor being developed for the XM1, but against anything up to 14.5 millimeters, it's comparable to much heavier steel plate at about one-third the weight. Their conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Daniels, who entered carrying a stack of modification plans. "Morning, Dr. Winters, Captain," he nodded curtly. "I've reviewed the drivetrain and have some concerns about the transmission durability under sustained high-speed operation." Sullivan noted the young officer's formal demeanor. "We'll test those limitations today, Lieutenant. Sometimes practical experience reveals more than theoretical analysis." Daniels's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "With respect, sir, I'd prefer to run simulations before risking mechanical failure in the field." "Noted, but we'll proceed as planned. Sometimes you have to push equipment to understand its true capabilities." The testing ground was a sprawling section of Fort Hood's northern range, featuring varied terrain from open flats to wooded hills and a small stream. Sergeant Wilkins had the Wildcat prepped and ready when Sullivan arrived with Daniels and Dr. Winters. "She's fueled up, checked out, and ready to roll, Captain," Wilkins reported, patting the vehicle affectionately. "I'll be monitoring engine performance from the command truck." Sullivan circled the Wildcat, conducting a final visual inspection before climbing onto the hull. The access hatches were simple affairs, nothing like the heavy armored hatches of an M60. Inside, the fighting compartment was cramped but functionally arranged. The driver's position featured basic controls, while the commander's station included the weapon mount controls and a simple optical sight. "Cool. I'll take the first drive," Sullivan announced. "Lieutenant Daniels, you'll observe from the command position." Daniels nodded stiffly and climbed in, clearly uncomfortable in the confined space. Sullivan settled into the driver's seat, familiarizing himself with the layout. The controls were straightforward, almost civilian in their simplicity. "Starting engine," Sullivan announced into his headset. The Slant 6 came to life with a surprisingly robust rumble for its size. "All systems nominal," Wilkins' voice came through the headset. "You're clear to proceed to the first test area." Sullivan engaged first gear, and the Wildcat lurched forward, quickly gaining speed as he guided it onto the dirt track. The vehicle's lightweight and responsive engine were immediately apparent, accelerating faster than any armored vehicle Sullivan had ever driven. Reaching 30 miles per hour, Sullivan reported, the engine singing as he shifted through the gears. Handling as responsive, almost like a Jeep rather than a tracked vehicle. They proceeded through a series of basic maneuverability tests, with Sullivan pushing the Wildcat through tight turns, reverse operations, and pivot steering. Throughout, the vehicle performed admirably, its low ground pressure and balanced weight distribution allowing for agile movement even on soft ground. "Moving to the obstacle course," Sullivan announced, directing the Wildcat toward a series of ditches, berms, and water obstacles. The first challenge was a steep-sided ditch, approximately 6 feet wide. Sullivan approached at moderate speed, feeling the vehicle's nose dip as it descended, then climbed sharply up the opposite side. The tracks maintained perfect traction throughout. Next came a water obstacle, a ford approximately 2 feet deep. The Wildcat splashed through without hesitation, its engine compartment well sealed against water intrusion. "How's it handling, sir?" Wilkins asked over the radio. "Exceptionally well," Sullivan replied, genuine appreciation in his voice. "The power-to-weight ratio makes it more responsive than I expected. Suspension is absorbing moderate impacts effectively." They continued through the course, testing the vehicle's capabilities against increasingly challenging terrain. A steep hillside, a rocky section that would challenge the track's durability, and finally a dense wooded area where maneuverability between trees was crucial. It was here that Sullivan truly began to appreciate the Wildcat's potential. Its narrow width allowed it to navigate between obstacles that would stop larger vehicles. Its low profile let it slip under branches that would scrape the turrets of conventional tanks. "This is where something like this makes sense," Sullivan commented to Daniels. "Urban environments, dense forests, anywhere conventional armor struggles to maneuver." Daniels nodded reluctantly. "It's performing better than I anticipated, especially in these tight spaces." They emerged from this wooded area onto an open firing range, where targets had been set up at various distances. Sullivan brought the Wildcat to a halt at the designated firing position. "Your turn to drive, Lieutenant. I'll take the commander's position and test the weapons mount." They switched places, Sullivan climbing into the commander's seat while Daniels took the controls. Above him, the Browning M250 caliber machine gun was mounted on a simple but effective swivel that allowed for a wide field of fire. "Proceed to the firing line," Sullivan ordered. Daniels drove competently, if somewhat cautiously, positioning the Wildcat for optimal firing position. Sullivan familiarized himself with the gun mount, appreciating its straightforward design. Unlike the complex fire control systems of modern tanks, this was deliberately simple, relying on the operator's skill rather than technology. "Beginning target engagement," Sullivan announced, swinging the heavy machine gun toward the first target, a silhouette representing an enemy troop concentration 500 meters distant. The Browning roared to life, its distinctive heavy bark echoing across the range. Sullivan walked the tracers into the target, feeling the familiar satisfaction as the rounds found their mark. He transitioned smoothly between targets, demonstrating the mount's responsiveness. "The gun mount is stable," he reported. "Minimal vibration affecting accuracy. Traverse is smooth." After exhausting a belt of ammunition, Sullivan tested another key feature of the Wildcat's design. With a few quick movements, he unlocked the machine gun from its mount. "Testing dismount procedure," he announced, lifting the Browning free and securing it to a folding tripod stored on the vehicle's exterior. Within minutes, he had the weapon set up on the ground beside the Wildcat, ready for independent operation. "Impressive," Dr. Winters commented from the command truck. "That gives the vehicle significant tactical flexibility." Sullivan nodded, remembering situations in Vietnam where the ability to quickly establish a machine gun position separate from the vehicle would have been invaluable. They continued testing throughout the day, pushing the Wildcat to its operational limits. By late afternoon, even Daniels seemed grudgingly impressed by the vehicle's performance. "It's not an M60, the lieutenant admitted as they secured the vehicle. "But for what it's designed to do, it's effective." Sullivan nodded. "Different tool for a different job." He patted the Wildcat's hull. "I'm starting to see what Harrington finds appealing about this concept." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Harrington, accompanied by a civilian Sullivan didn't recognize. "Captain Sullivan," Harrington called out, "how did our little warrior perform today?" "Exceeded expectations, sir, particularly in restricted terrain and water obstacles. The weapon system is simple but effective. Lieutenant Daniels has some concerns about transmission durability under sustained high-speed operations, but we encountered no issues today." Harrington nodded, pleased. "Excellent. This is Victor Rodriguez from our intelligence section. He'll be joining your team as weapons systems specialist." Rodriguez, a compact, athletic man in his early 40s with a neatly trimmed mustache, offered his hand. "Captain Sullivan, I've heard good things." Sullivan shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the calculating assessment in the man's eyes. "Welcome aboard. We could use expertise on potential weapons configurations." "That's why I'm here," Rodriguez replied with a slight smile. "I have some ideas about expanding the Wildcat's capabilities beyond the 50 cal. As they walked toward the command building for debriefing, Sullivan studied Rodriguez. Something about the man seemed familiar. "Have we met before?" Sullivan asked casually. Rodriguez's expression revealed nothing. "I don't believe so, Captain. I spent most of my career in specialized units. Not much overlap with conventional armor." Sullivan nodded, though the nagging sense of recognition persisted. Perhaps it would come to him later. The debriefing was thorough, with each team member providing their observations. Wilkins reported that the engine performed within parameters, though he recommended modifications to the cooling system for sustained high-temperature operations. Daniels presented his concerns about the transmission, supporting his arguments with technical specifications. Dr. Winters discussed potential improvements to the armor arrangement based on observed vehicle dynamics. Throughout, General Harrington listened attentively, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his deep understanding of armored vehicle development. When the formal reports concluded, he addressed the team. "Today's results are encouraging. You've confirmed what I believed about the Wildcat's potential. Over the next weeks, we'll refine the design based on your findings and prepare for extended field trials. Captain Sullivan, I'd like your preliminary assessment report on my desk by 0800 tomorrow." After the meeting dispersed, Sullivan found himself alone in the small office assigned to him, compiling his notes for the report. A knock at the door interrupted his work. "Entered," he called. Rodriguez appeared, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this, Captain." "Thanks," Sullivan accepted the cup gratefully. "Settling in okay?" "Getting there." Rodriguez took a seat without being invited, his manner casual. "So what do you really think of our little project?" Sullivan considered his response carefully. It has potential, different from anything in our current inventory. Reminds me of some of the light tanks from World War II, but modernized. Rodriguez nodded. That's because it essentially is. The Wildcat's basic concept dates back to designs from the 1940s and 50s. Small, fast, expendable. Fast. Expendable isn't a term we typically apply to vehicles with crews, Sullivan noted. True enough, Rodriguez conceded. But in military planning, everything has its cost-benefit analysis. He sipped his coffee. Vietnam, right? 11th Armored Cav? Sullivan nodded. 2 tours, 68 to 70. And Locke? Among other places. Rodriguez studied him thoughtfully. I was there too, different unit. Special Forces. Sullivan looked up sharply. That explained the sense of recognition. Green Berets? Something like that. Rodriguez's smile never reached his eyes. We operated in the same AO for a while. Probably crossed paths without knowing it. A memory surfaced in Sullivan's mind. Fragmented but disturbing. A night operation near the Cambodian border. His tank providing fire support for an unauthorized cross-border mission. No insignia on the men they were supporting. No official record of the operation afterward. Possibly, Sullivan said neutrally. Rodriguez changed the subject smoothly. I've been reviewing the weapons options for the Wildcat. The 50 cal is good, but limited. I'm thinking we should test some light anti-tank capabilities. Maybe a TOW missile launcher attachment. Significant weight addition, Sullivan noted, might compromise the vehicle's mobility advantage. True, but it would dramatically increase tactical utility. Rodriguez stood. Just something to consider. We'll talk more tomorrow. After Rodriguez left, Sullivan sat back, his report momentarily forgotten. The conversation had left him uneasy. There was more to Rodriguez than a simple weapons specialist, and possibly more to the Wildcat project than Harrington had revealed. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Sullivan, Dad? Michael's voice came through, young and uncertain. Sullivan's demeanor softened immediately. Hey, champ, I heard you pitched a great game yesterday. It was okay. Coach says I need to work on my curveball. That'll come with practice. How's school going? A pause. Fine, I guess. Your mom mentioned there was some trouble? Another longer pause. Tommy Radner said you weren't a real soldier because you just drive tanks instead of fighting. So I hit him. Sullivan closed his eyes, feeling the complex mixture of pride and concern that defines so much of fatherhood. Fighting isn't the answer, Michael. But he was wrong about you. I know what you did in Vietnam. I found your medal in your drawer. The Silver Star. Sullivan had never discussed it with his son. Never wanted to. Michael, listen to me. What I did or didn't do doesn't matter. What matters is that you don't let words push you into doing something you'll regret. He softened his tone. But thank you for standing up for me. When are you coming home, Dad? The question hit Sullivan like a physical blow. As soon as I can, buddy. This assignment is important. Mom says you always say that. I know. And I'm sorry. Sullivan struggled to find the right words. Sometimes being a soldier means missing things we don't want to miss. But I promise I'll make it up to you. After saying goodbye, Sullivan sat in silence. The weight of his divided loyalties heavy on his shoulders. Family versus duty. It was the eternal soldier's dilemma, and one he had never fully resolved. He returned to his report with renewed focus, determined to complete this assignment as efficiently as possible. The sooner the Wildcat project concluded, the sooner he could return home. The next morning, Sullivan arrived early to find Dr. Winters already in her laboratory, examining what appeared to be damaged armor samples. Problems? He asked, approaching her workstation. She looked up, seemingly unsurprised by his early appearance. Just analyzing some anomalies in the test plates. The ceramic component is showing microfractures that shouldn't be present at this stage. Sullivan studied the samples with interest. Manufacturing defect? Possibly. She adjusted her glasses, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as a sign of concentration. Or it could indicate a fundamental design issue. I'm comparing these samples to earlier prototypes. Sullivan noticed a folder on her desk labeled with a project code he didn't recognize. Following his gaze, Dr. Winters smoothly covered it with another document. Classified research, she explained, unrelated to Wildcat. Sullivan nodded, though his instincts suggested otherwise. I submitted my preliminary assessment to General Harrington. Overall positive, with some reservations about battlefield survivability against modern anti-tank weapons. That's not what it's designed to face, Dr. Winters replied, perhaps too quickly. The Wildcat is meant for security operations, reconnaissance, counterinsurgency, not tank versus tank engagements. Even in those roles, it would encounter threats. RPGs are ubiquitous, and even older anti-tank weapons could penetrate its armor. Dr. Winters seemed about to respond when the door opened and General Harrington entered, followed by Rodriguez and a civilian Sullivan didn't recognize. "Good morning," Harrington greeted them. "I've read your report, Captain. Thorough and insightful. I particularly appreciated your tactical assessment of potential employment scenarios." "Thank you, sir. This is Howard Jenkins from the State Department." Harrington introduced the newcomer, a thin, scholarly-looking man in his 50s. "He'll be observing our progress with interest in potential foreign military sales applications." Jenkins offered a limp handshake. "Captain, Dr. Winters, a pleasure. General Harrington speaks highly of your work." Something about the man's demeanor struck Sullivan as odd. He seemed uncomfortable, out of place in a military research facility. "Mr. Jenkins will be with us for the remainder of the project," Harrington continued. "Please afford him all courtesies and access to non-classified materials." He checked his watch. "We have a progress briefing in 30 minutes. Captain Sullivan, walk with me, please." Once they were alone in the corridor, Harrington's demeanor changed subtly. "Your report was candid. I appreciate that. Just being thorough, sir. Your concerns about survivability are valid, but as Dr. Winters noted, the Wildcat isn't intended for direct engagement with enemy armor. It's designed to be numerous, dispersed, and if necessary, sacrificial." Harrington's expression hardened slightly. "The harsh reality is that not every ally can afford M60s or will have access to the XM1 when it enters production. The Wildcat fills a critical capability gap." Sullivan nodded. "I understand the strategic concept, sir. My assessment reflects tactical realities that crews would face." "Fair enough." Harrington paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "There's another aspect to this project that I haven't disclosed fully. The Wildcat's design incorporates elements from several historical sources, including some we'd rather not advertise." Sullivan's interest sharpened. "Such as?" Harrington glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "After World War II, we acquired numerous German and Soviet designs. Some were studied openly, others more discreetly. The Wildcat's basic concept draws heavily from a Soviet reconnaissance vehicle design that was never widely fielded but showed promise in limited deployment." "A Soviet design?" Sullivan couldn't hide his surprise. "Adapted significantly," Harrington clarified. "But yes, certain elements of the suspension system and overall configuration were inspired by Soviet work. Dr. Winters' armor system is entirely American, as are the power plant and weapons integration." Sullivan processed this unexpected information. "Why not start fresh with a completely American design?" "Time and Guam," Harrington replied simply. "We needed a solution quickly, and the Soviet design had already solved certain engineering challenges. It's not uncommon in military development, though we don't advertise it." Before Sullivan could respond, they were interrupted by Lieutenant Daniels approaching with the stack of reports. "Sir, the transmission stress analysis is complete," Daniels reported. "I've identified several critical failure points under sustained high RPM operation." "Thank you, Lieutenant. We'll discuss it at the briefing," Harrington replied, effectively dismissing him. As Daniels departed, Sullivan noticed the young officer's barely concealed frustration. "Lieutenant Daniels seems less than enthusiastic about this assignment," he observed. Harrington's expression darkened slightly. "Daniels is brilliant but politically connected. His father is Senator Richard Daniels, Armed Services Committee. The lieutenant expected a prestigious assignment on the XM1 program, where he could build his resume. Instead, he's here." "That explains the attitude," Sullivan mused. "Should I be concerned about his commitment to the project?" "No," Harrington said firmly. "Whatever his personal feelings, he's a professional, and his technical skills are valuable. Just keep him focused on the engineering challenges rather than career implications." The progress briefing was detailed and technical, focusing on the initial test results and proposed modifications. Sergeant Wilkins outlined engine performance improvements, Daniels presented his transmission analysis, and Dr. Winters discussed armor refinements. Rodriguez contributed suggestions for weapons integration, including the TOW missile system he had mentioned to Sullivan. Throughout, Jenkins observed silently, occasionally making notes but offering no comments. Sullivan found himself watching the State Department representative, curious about his actual role in the project. After the briefing concluded, Sullivan returned to his office to plan the next phase of testing. He was deep in review of performance data when Sarah, the project's administrative assistant, knocked on his door. "Captain Sullivan, you have a call. It's your wife. She says it's urgent." Sullivan's heart rate spiked. "Thank you, put her through." He picked up the phone. "Linda, what's wrong?" "It's Michael." Her voice was tight with a controlled emotion. "He's been suspended from school. The principal wants to meet with both of us tomorrow morning." Sullivan closed his eyes. "What happened?" "Another fight, worse this time. The other boy needed stitches, Jack." "Christ," he muttered. "Is Michael okay?" "Physically, yes. Emotionally." She let the sentence hang. "He needs his father, Jack." Not a voice on the phone. Sullivan glanced at the calendar on his desk, mentally calculating. "I'll be there. I'll drive up tonight." "Really?" The surprise in her voice was a knife twist of guilt. "Yes. Tell Michael I am coming home." After arranging emergency leave with Harrington's staff, Sullivan packed a small bag and headed for his car. As he crossed the parking lot, he noticed Rodriguez leaning against a vehicle, watching him. "Family emergency," Rodriguez called. Sullivan nodded, not breaking stride. "My son, I'll be back tomorrow evening." "Kids are tough," Rodriguez said, falling into step beside him, "especially when Dad's away serving his country. They act out, try to get attention." Something in his tone made Sullivan pause. "Sounds like you speak from experience." Rodriguez shrugged. "2 divorces and 3 kids I rarely see. Hazards of the profession." He offered a cigarette, which Sullivan declined. "Before you go, there's something you should know about the Wildcat." Sullivan's attention sharpened. "What about it?" "It's not just Soviet-inspired," Rodriguez said quietly. "It's almost a direct copy of a prototype they fielded briefly in the early 50s. A vehicle called the LTK-3, developed for airborne operations but never mass-produced." Sullivan frowned. "How do you know this?" "Intelligence is my actual specialty, Captain. Weapon systems are just a cover." Rodriguez lit his cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face in the gathering dusk. "Harrington acquired the design through unconventional channels. That's why Jenkins is here. State Department oversight for a project with potentially problematic origins." "Why are you telling me this?" Rodriguez exhaled a plume of smoke. "Because you're the one testing it, putting your name on reports. If this blows up politically, you should know what you're involved with." He stepped back. "Drive safe, Captain. Family comes first." Sullivan watched him walk away, unsettled by the conversation. He completed the drive to his home in San Antonio in just under 3 hours, his mind divided between concern for Michael and the unsettling revelations about the Wildcat project. The house was quiet when he arrived shortly after midnight. He entered silently, not wanting to wake anyone. In the kitchen, he found Linda sitting at the table, a cup of cold tea before her. "Jack," she said simply, rising to embrace him. Despite the circumstances, there was comfort in her familiar presence. "How is he?" Sullivan asked after they separated. "Angry. Confused." Linda ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of fatigue Sullivan knew well. "He doesn't understand why you're gone so much." "I don't think I do either anymore." Sullivan had no ready answer. "I'll talk to him in the morning. Try to straighten things out." "It's not that simple, Jack. This isn't about one fight or one suspension. It's a pattern." Linda's eyes held a mixture of concern and accusation. "He's trying to be you, the soldier, the fighter, but he doesn't understand what that really means." Sullivan nodded, accepting the truth in her words. "I know. I'll make it right." But as he lay awake in bed beside his sleeping wife, Sullivan wondered if that was a promise he could keep. The military had been his life for so long that he sometimes struggled to see beyond it. Now, with the Wildcat project raising uncomfortable questions and his son in trouble, the certainties he had relied upon seemed suddenly unstable. Morning brought the reckoning he had expected. Michael, sullen and defensive, barely acknowledged his presence at breakfast. The principal, a stern woman with decades of educational experience, laid out the situation in unsparing detail. Michael had attacked another boy who had made disparaging comments about military families. "Violence is never acceptable in our school, regardless of the provocation," she concluded. "Michael will be suspended for 3 days, and upon his return, he'll meet regularly with our guidance counselor." "I understand," Sullivan replied, his hand resting supportively on his son's shoulder. "It won't happen again." After leaving the school, Sullivan took Michael for a drive, seeking privacy for the conversation they needed to have. "Want to tell me what happened?" he asked when they were alone. Michael stared out the window. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." The boy was silent for a long moment. "Bobby Keller said soldiers are just killers with permission." That his dad says the war was wrong and everyone who fought in it was either a fool or a murderer. His voice cracked slightly. He said you probably enjoyed killing people. Sullivan felt a surge of anger, quickly suppressed. So you hit him? I had to, Dad. Michael finally looked at him, his young face earnest and troubled. He was wrong about you. Sullivan pulled the car into a park overlooking the city. Michael, listen to me. What I did in Vietnam, it's complicated. War is complicated. It's not something you can explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. Did you kill people? The directness of the question caught Sullivan off guard. Yes, he answered honestly, because that was my duty, and sometimes in war, it's kill or be killed. But I never enjoyed it, never wanted it. What I wanted was to protect my friends, complete our mission, and come home. Michael absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. I just wanted to protect you, like you protected your friends. Sullivan felt a profound ache in his chest. I appreciate that, son, but fighting isn't the way. What matters isn't what others say about me or about soldiers. What matters is that you and I know the truth. But you're always gone, Michael said, the hurt evident in his voice. Mom cries sometimes when she thinks I can't hear. And when you are home, you're still not really here. The accusation stung because Sullivan recognized its truth. Too often, his mind remained on duty, even when his body was home. The compartmentalization that served him well as a soldier failed him as a father. You're right, he admitted, and I'm sorry. I haven't been the father you deserve. He turned fully to face his son. But I'm going to do better, starting now. They spent the remainder of the day together, talking more openly than they had in years. Sullivan shared appropriate stories from his military career, emphasizing teamwork and courage rather than combat. Michael, in turn, opened up about his struggles at school and his confusion about his father's frequent absences. By evening, when Sullivan prepared to return to Fort Hood, a fragile new understanding existed between them. I have to go back tonight, he explained to Michael. This project is important, but I promise I'll be home for your game next Saturday, no matter what. Michael nodded, still disappointed but less angry. Will you tell me about the project when it's not classified anymore? Sullivan smiled. Someday, maybe. For now, just know that it's something that might help keep other soldiers safe. After saying goodbye to Linda, who remained reserved but appreciative of his efforts with Michael, Sullivan began the drive back to Fort Hood. His mind was clearer now, focused on both his familial responsibilities and the questions surrounding the Wildcat project. When he arrived back at the facility the next morning, he found the team already engaged in modification work on the prototype. Sergeant Wilkins was supervising engine modifications, while Lieutenant Daniels worked with technicians on the transmission issues he had identified. Welcome back, Captain, Wilkins greeted him. Family situation sorted? As much as it can be, Sullivan replied. What's our status? Making good progress. General Harrington authorized the modifications we recommended. We should be ready for another test run tomorrow morning. Sullivan nodded, then noticed Dr. Winters emerging from her laboratory, engaged in intense conversation with Jenkins from the State Department. Their discussion ceased abruptly when they noticed Sullivan's return. Captain, Dr. Winters acknowledged him with a professional nod. I hope your family matters are resolved. Thank you, Doctor. Sullivan glanced between them, noting the tension. Mr. Jenkins, getting acquainted with our project? Jenkins smiled thinly. Indeed, Dr. Winters has been most informative about the technical aspects. Fascinating work. After they departed, Sullivan sought out Rodriguez, finding him in the weapons testing area, examining mounting brackets for the proposed TOW missile system. We need to talk, Sullivan said quietly, about what you told me before I left. Rodriguez nodded, leading him to a more private area. I assumed you'd have questions. If what you said is true about the Wildcat's origins, we're potentially violating international patents and arms development protocols, Sullivan stated. Not to mention the political implications if it became public that we're copying Soviet designs. All true, Rodriguez agreed, though technically the Soviets themselves copied the original design from a British vehicle called the Carden-Lloyd carrier from the 1920s. Military technology has always been circuitous in its development. Sullivan frowned. That doesn't justify potential legal or ethical violations. No, it doesn't, Rodriguez admitted, but consider the strategic implications. The Soviets have been supplying their allies and proxies with effective, inexpensive armored vehicles for decades. We've focused on high-end technology that many of our allies can't afford or maintain. The Wildcat addresses that imbalance. At what cost? Sullivan pressed. If this project is compromised, the damage to U.S. credibility would be significant. Rodriguez studied him thoughtfully. You're right to be concerned, Wadden, but there's more at stake than you realize. He glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. The Wildcat project isn't just about developing a new vehicle, it's about identifying a security leak within our defense establishment. Sullivan's expression hardened. Explain. For the past 2 years, several classified design elements from various projects have appeared in Soviet systems. The leak must be coming from someone with high-level access. The Wildcat project, with its deliberately obscured origins, is partially a trap to identify the source. And you suspect someone on our team, Sullivan concluded. Rodriguez neither confirmed nor denied. I'm telling you this because I need your help. Watch for anomalies, unusual behaviors, unexplained communications. Report anything directly to me or General Harrington, no one else. Sullivan processed this troubling information, his military training automatically assessing the situation. If Rodriguez was telling the truth, the Wildcat project was far more significant than he had initially believed. If he was lying, the implications were equally concerning. I'll keep my eyes open, Sullivan said finally, but I expect full disclosure moving forward. No more surprises. Rodriguez nodded. Fair enough. Now, about these tow W mounts, I think we can integrate them without compromising the vehicle's mobility advantages. As they returned to technical discussions, Sullivan found his perspective on the project fundamentally altered. What had seemed a straightforward vehicle development effort now appeared riddled with hidden agendas and potential dangers. The soldier in him recognized the familiar terrain of covert operations and intelligence games. The father in him worried about the implications for his career and family if things went wrong. That evening, as Sullivan reviewed the day's progress reports in his office, he found himself staring at the technical drawings of the Wildcat. Its angular profile and compact dimensions had initially struck him as odd, even toy-like. Now, understanding more of its origins and purpose, he saw it differently. A small but potentially significant piece in the global chess match of the Cold War. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Sullivan, he answered. Captain, it's Dr. Winters. Could you come to the laboratory? There's something you should see. Her tone carried an urgency that put Sullivan on alert. On my way. The laboratory was dimly lit when he arrived, most staff having departed for the evening. Dr. Winters stood alone at her workstation, examining what appeared to be photographic negatives on a light table. Thank you for coming, she said, her expression grave. I've made a discovery that concerns me deeply. Sullivan joined her at the light table. What am I looking at? Microscopic analysis of the armor samples, she explained. I've found trace elements that shouldn't be present in our composition, including unique identifiers we deliberately include in classified armor formulations. Meaning, someone has tampered with our test plates, replacing them with compromised versions. Her eyes met his. Versions that would fail catastrophically under actual combat conditions. Sullivan felt a chill. Sabotage. Dr. Winters nodded. Precisely. And not amateur work. This required intimate knowledge of our materials science and access to restricted areas. She handed him a folder. I've documented everything. The question is, who do we trust with this information? Sullivan thought of Rodriguez's warning about a potential security leak. For now, just me. Let me secure this in my safe until I can determine the appropriate chain of reporting. As he accepted the folder, Sullivan noticed something familiar about Dr. Winters' handwriting on the label. It tickled a memory from years before, a requisition form he had seen briefly during his time in Vietnam, attached to a classified weapons testing program. The same distinctive script. Have you ever worked in field testing, Doctor? Perhaps in Southeast Asia? The question clearly caught her off guard. My work has taken me to many locations, Captain. Why do you ask? Just curious about your background, Sullivan replied casually. Not many women in advanced weapons development. She seemed to relax slightly. It's certainly been a challenging career path. Now, about these findings, as they discussed the technical aspects of the sabotage, Sullivan maintained his professional demeanor while inwardly reassessing everything he thought he knew about the Wildcat project and the people involved. The coincidence seemed too significant to ignore, yet he had no concrete evidence of wrongdoing. One thing was becoming increasingly clear. The Wildcat project was far more complex and potentially dangerous than a simple vehicle development program. And Sullivan found himself caught in the middle, with responsibilities to his team, his superiors, his country, and most importantly, to the family waiting for him at home. The small, unassuming vehicle sitting in the hangar nearby was no longer just an engineering challenge or a tactical tool. It had become the focal point of what might be a much larger and more dangerous game, one whose rules and players remained shrouded in secrecy. As Sullivan left the laboratory with the folder secured inside his jacket, he glanced back at Dr. Winters, still bent over her workstation. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face, momentarily transforming her familiar features into those of a stranger. In that instant, Sullivan realized that in the world of classified projects and Cold War maneuvering, everyone was potentially both ally and adversary. The true challenge would be determining which was which before it was too late, for him, for the project, and perhaps for secrets that extended far beyond a small, armored vehicle with an uncertain heritage. The Wildcat had drawn him into a web of intrigue he hadn't anticipated when accepting this assignment. Now, the only way out was through navigating dangers both obvious and hidden, with the safety of his career, his integrity, and possibly his family hanging in the balance. Sullivan squared his shoulders and walked toward his office. The weight of the folder against his chest, a reminder of the burdens of command, the price of service, and the thin line between duty and danger, in a world where even the smallest tanks could conceal the largest secrets. The dawn broke over Fort Hood with the relentless Texas sun already promising another scorching day. Captain Jack Sullivan stood beside the Wildcat, watching as Sergeant Wilkins performed final checks on the engine modifications they'd implemented over the past week. The vehicle looked different now, with additional mounting points for the proposed weapon systems and a revised cooling arrangement visible through the engine access panels. "She's ready, Captain," Wilkins announced, wiping his hands on a rag. "Those cooling baffles should solve our overheating issues at sustained high speeds, and the transmission reinforcements Lieutenant Daniels designed ought to handle the stress better." Sullivan nodded, circling the small vehicle with an appraising eye. Despite the questions surrounding the project, he couldn't deny his growing appreciation for the Wildcat's potential. It was nimble in ways conventional armor could never be, capable of accessing terrain that would stymie larger vehicles. The more he worked with it, the more he recognized its tactical value. "Where's the lieutenant?" Sullivan asked, noting Daniel's absence from the morning preparations. Wilkins shrugged. "Haven't seen him yet. Dr. Winters is in her lab prepping the new armor samples for today's ballistic tests." As if summoned by her name, Eleanor Winters emerged from the main building, carrying a clipboard and looking troubled. She approached Sullivan with purpose in her stride. "Captain, a word," she requested, gesturing away from the others. They stepped aside, moving toward the shade of a nearby vehicle canopy. "The armor analysis I showed you last night, I locked it in my lab safe before leaving," she said quietly. "This morning I found the safe open. Nothing was taken, but someone definitely examined the contents." Sullivan's expression remained neutral, though his mind raced through implications. "Who has access to your safe?" "That's the concerning part. Only General Harrington and myself have the combination." She hesitated, at least officially. Sullivan absorbed this information, adding it to the growing list of irregularities surrounding the project. "Keep this between us for now. Continue your work as normal, but document everything meticulously." She nodded, then glanced over his shoulder. "Lieutenant Daniels has arrived, and he's not alone." Sullivan turned to see Daniels walking across the compound, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit who carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Even at a distance, the family resemblance was clear. "Senator Daniels," Dr. Winters murmured, "the lieutenant's father. This can't be good." Sullivan silently agreed. A visit from a member of the Armed Services Committee to a classified project without prior notice suggested trouble. He straightened his uniform and moved to intercept them, gesturing for Wilkins to continue preparations. "Lieutenant," Sullivan greeted them with professional courtesy, "I wasn't aware we were expecting visitors today." The younger Daniels appeared uncomfortable, caught between military protocol and filial duty. "Captain Sullivan, may I introduce my father, Senator Richard Daniels?" "Father, this is Captain Sullivan, the project leader I mentioned." The senator extended his hand with the practiced ease of a career politician. "Captain, my son speaks highly of your operational experience, if not always the strategic wisdom of this particular project." Sullivan accepted the handshake, noting the implied criticism. "We value Lieutenant Daniels' engineering contributions, Senator, though I'm surprised to see you here. Protocol for classified projects typically requires advanced clearance for all visitors, even those with your security status." Senator Daniels smiled thinly. General Harrington and I have an understanding. I'm here unofficially, simply to observe my son's work firsthand. Before Sullivan could respond, General Harrington himself emerged from headquarters, his expression carefully composed as he approached the group. Senator Daniels, Harrington called out, what an unexpected pleasure. I wasn't aware you were planning a visit to our humble project. The exchange of pleasantries barely masked the tension between the two men. Sullivan observed their interaction closely, noting the subtle power dynamics at play. This was clearly not the first confrontation between them. General, the senator responded with equal formality. I was in the area for a base funding review and thought I'd see what's kept my son so occupied these past weeks. Though I must say, now that I'm here, it seems a rather modest operation for something claiming priority Pentagon funding. Harrington's smile never wavered. Appearances can be deceptive, Senator. Perhaps you'd care for a project briefing in my office before today's field trials begin. As the two men departed toward headquarters, Lieutenant Daniels remained behind, visibly uncomfortable. I didn't know he was coming, Daniels said once they were alone. He showed up at my quarters this morning unannounced. Sullivan studied the younger man. Your father doesn't appear supportive of the Wildcat project. Daniels sighed. He believes the future of American armor lies exclusively with main battle tanks like the XM-1. Anything else is a distraction or waste of resources. He hesitated. To be honest, sir, I shared that view when I first arrived. But after working with the Wildcat, I'm beginning to see its potential value. This admission surprised Sullivan. What changed your mind, Lieutenant? Engineering reality, Daniels replied. The XM-1 is a marvel of technology, but it's also incredibly complex and expensive. The Wildcat's simplicity gives it advantages in certain scenarios, and your tactical applications have been eye-opening. Sullivan nodded, reassessing the young officer. Perhaps there was more substance to Marcus Daniels than he had initially credited. We should prepare for the field trials, Sullivan said. Your father will likely want an impressive demonstration. The morning progressed with final preparations for the day's testing. Victor Rodriguez arrived with the prototype 2W missile mount he'd been developing, while Wilkins conducted last-minute engine tuning. Dr. Winters supervised the installation of her latest armor samples on the test panels, her manner professional but guarded. By mid-morning, they were ready to begin. Senator Daniels and General Harrington had returned from their private meeting, the senator's expressions suggesting the conversation had been less than harmonious. Jenkins from State Department hovered nearby, watchful but uninvolved. We'll begin with mobility testing, Sullivan announced to the assembled team and observers. Lieutenant Daniels will drive the first course to demonstrate the transmission improvements. I'll command the second phase for weapons integration assessment. The test course had been expanded since their initial trials, now incorporating steeper gradients, water obstacles of varying depths, in a mock urban environment constructed from shipping containers and concrete barriers. It represented a comprehensive challenge for the Wildcat's capabilities. Lieutenant Daniels climbed into the driver's position while Sullivan took the commander's station. Despite the cramped conditions, they had developed an efficient working relationship over the past weeks. Communications check, Sullivan said into his headset. Clear, Daniels replied. Systems nominal. Ready when you are, sir. Sullivan glanced back at the observation post where Senator Daniels stood watching, his expression skeptical. Let's show them what this little machine can do, Lieutenant. Execute course alpha. Daniels engaged the engine, which purred to life with the improvements Wilkins had implemented. The Wildcat moved forward smoothly, accelerating rapidly toward the first obstacle, a steep embankment designed to test traction. The vehicle climbed without hesitation, its lightweight and powerful engine allowing it to scale the incline that would challenge heavier vehicles. At the top, Daniels executed a sharp pivot turn, demonstrating the Wildcat's maneuverability before descending the opposite side. Approaching water obstacle, Daniels reported as they neared a muddy ford approximately 3 feet deep. Proceed, Sullivan ordered. Maintain steady momentum. The Wildcat entered the water with barely a reduction in speed, its sealed engine compartment and elevated air intakes preventing water intrusion. It emerged on the far side, slinging mud but maintaining traction. Transmission temperature nominal, Daniels reported. No signs of stress under load. Sullivan nodded, pleased with the vehicle's performance. Proceed to the urban course. The mock urban environment represented perhaps the most relevant test of the Wildcat's capabilities. Narrow passages between containers, sharp corners, and debris-strewn pathways mimicked the challenging conditions of urban combat. Here, the vehicle's compact size proved advantageous. allowing it to navigate spaces that would stymie conventional tanks. Impressive, Rodriguez commented over the radio from the observation post. Try the collapsed building scenario at Point Charlie. Sullivan directed Daniels toward a partially collapsed structure simulation, where concrete slabs created a narrow passage barely wider than the Wildcat itself. The vehicle negotiated the obstacle with precision, its low profile allowing it to pass beneath overhanging debris. Throughout the mobility demonstration, Sullivan monitored the reactions of their observers. Senator Daniels appeared increasingly thoughtful, his initial skepticism giving way to professional interest. General Harrington remained impassive, though Sullivan detected satisfaction in his bearing. After completing the mobility course, they returned to the starting point for the second phase of testing. Phase 1 complete, Sullivan reported as they emerged from the vehicle. Mobility enhancements performing as expected. No observed limitations in terrain navigation. Excellent, Harrington responded. Proceed with weapons integration testing when ready. While Rodriguez and his technical team attached the experimental TOW missile mount to the Wildcat, Sullivan conferred briefly with Wilkins about the engine performance. Running smooth as silk, Captain, the sergeant reported. Temperature remained well within parameters, even during the water crossing. Lieutenant Daniels' transmission modifications held up perfectly. Sullivan nodded his appreciation, then noticed Dr. Winters approaching with a concerned expression. A moment, Captain, she requested, leading him aside. I've completed preliminary analysis of the armor samples from this morning's ballistic tests. The results are inconsistent with my expectations. Compromised? Sullivan asked quietly. Not exactly. The performance is actually superior to my projections. Significantly superior. Her expression conveyed professional confusion. It's as if someone improved my formula without my knowledge. Before Sullivan could process this unexpected development, they were interrupted by Rodriguez announcing readiness for the weapons testing phase. The TOW mount is installed and balanced, he reported. We've calibrated the sight integration and loaded a practice round for the demonstration. Sullivan returned to the Wildcat, now taking the driver's position while Rodriguez occupied the commander-gunner station. The addition of the TOW launcher had altered the vehicle's profile but added minimally to its weight thanks to the composite materials used in the mount design. All observers, be advised we are commencing live fire demonstration, Sullivan announced over the radio. First with the 50 caliber machine gun, followed by TOW missile simulator. He drove the Wildcat to the designated firing position, overlooking a range where target silhouettes had been positioned at varying distances. Rodriguez traversed the machine gun, acquiring the nearest target. Engaging Target 1, he announced before firing a controlled burst. The heavy rounds impacted precisely, destroying the silhouette. He transitioned smoothly between targets, demonstrating the mount's stability and accuracy even with the vehicle in motion as Sullivan executed evasive maneuvers. After exhausting the machine gun demonstration, Rodriguez prepared the TOW system. Transitioning to anti-tank capability, he reported. Target acquired at 1,500 meters. The practice round launched with a whoosh, trailing its guidance wire as it streaked toward the distant tank silhouette. The impact was precise, striking the center mass of the target. Direct hit, Rodriguez announced with professional satisfaction. Guidance system integration functioning as designed. They completed the weapons testing with several more simulated engagements, including on-the-move firing and rapid position changes. Throughout, the Wildcat performed admirably, its lightweight and responsive handling complementing the weapon systems. Upon returning to the assembly area, Sullivan found the observers engaged in animated discussion. Senator Daniels was speaking with General Harrington, his earlier skepticism apparently diminished. Impressive demonstration, Captain, the senator acknowledged as Sullivan approached. The urban maneuverability in particular exceeds anything in our current inventory. Thank you, Senator. The Wildcat fills a capability gap in our armored vehicle spectrum. So it seems. The senator glanced toward his son, who was conferring with Wilkins about the vehicle's performance. Lieutenant Daniels' contributions appear significant. Sullivan nodded. Your son is an excellent engineer, sir. His transmission modifications were crucial to today's successful demonstration. The senator seemed pleased by this assessment. Perhaps this assignment isn't the career detour I initially considered it. He lowered his voice. Though I remain concerned about certain aspects of the project's origins and oversight. This comment caught Sullivan's attention. Sir, Senator Daniels glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. Let's just say that not everyone in Washington shares General Harrington's enthusiasm for this particular venture. Questions have been raised about technology sourcing and appropriations procedures. Before Sullivan could respond, they were interrupted by Jenkins from the State Department, who had appeared with remarkable timing. Captain Sullivan, General Harrington requests your presence for the post-demonstration briefing, Jenkins announced smoothly. Of course, Sullivan nodded respectfully to the senator. If you'll excuse me, sir. As he walked toward headquarters, Sullivan processed the senator's cryptic warning. Combined with Rodriguez's revelations and the inconsistencies in Dr. Winter's armor testing, a troubling pattern was emerging. The Wildcat project seemed surrounded by cross-currents of hidden agendas and questionable activities. The post-demonstration briefing was technically focused, with each team member reporting on their respective areas of responsibility. Throughout, Sullivan observed the interactions between Harrington, Jenkins, and Dr. Winters, noting subtle tensions in their exchanges. When the briefing concluded, General Harrington asked Sullivan to remain behind. Your assessment of today's demonstration, Captain? Harrington inquired once they were alone. The Wildcat exceeded performance expectations in all test parameters, Sullivan reported honestly. The mobility enhancements functioned as designed, and the weapons integration shows promise, particularly in urban environments where larger vehicles would be constrained. Harrington nodded, satisfaction evident in his bearing. Senator Daniels appeared impressed, despite his initial skepticism. Yes, sir, though he mentioned concerns about the project's origins. Harrington's expression hardened slightly. The senator has political ambitions beyond his current position. He's aligning himself with defense contractors supporting the XM1 program, who see the Wildcat as a potential threat to their funding priorities. Is it? Sullivan asked directly. In pure dollar terms, no. The Wildcat is a fraction of the XM1's budget, but in philosophical terms, perhaps. Harrington moved to the window, gazing out at the compound where the team was securing the Wildcat for the night. The American defense establishment has embraced complexity and technology as the answer to every military challenge. The Wildcat represents an alternative approach, emphasizing simplicity, adaptability, and cost-effectiveness. Sullivan considered this perspective, making it politically controversial despite its tactical utility. Precisely. Harrington turned back to face him, which is why demonstrations like today's are crucial. We need to build support based on proven performance, not theoretical arguments. After leaving headquarters, Sullivan found Rodriguez waiting by his vehicle, smoking a cigarette with casual nonchalance that seemed practiced. Successful day, Rodriguez commented as Sullivan approached. The senator seemed impressed. On the surface, Sullivan agreed, though he hinted at concerns about the project's origins. Rodriguez nodded, unsurprised. Political headwinds are gathering. There's a Pentagon budget review scheduled next month, and the Wildcat isn't the only program under scrutiny. Sullivan studied the intelligence officer thoughtfully. You seem well informed about the political dimensions. Part of my job, Rodriguez replied with a shrug. Military intelligence intersects with political reality more often than most officers recognize. He flicked his cigarette away. But that's not why I waited for you. There is something you should see. He handed Sullivan a manila envelope. These were taken 3 days ago at Dulles International Airport. I thought you should be aware. Sullivan opened the envelope to find surveillance photographs of Dr. Eleanor Winters meeting with a man Sullivan didn't recognize. The images showed them exchanging what appeared to be documents in the airport concourse. Who's the man? Sullivan asked, studying the grainy photographs. Polish diplomatic attaché Andrzej Nowak, known intelligence operative for Warsaw Pact interests. Rodriguez's expression remained neutral. The meeting itself isn't necessarily suspicious. Dr. Winters has authorized academic exchanges with foreign scientists, but the location and apparent secrecy suggest otherwise. Sullivan processed this troubling information. Have you shown these to General Harrington? Not yet. I wanted your assessment first, given your direct working relationship with Dr. Winters. Sullivan returned the photographs to the envelope. I'll keep this in mind during our interactions. Let me know if there are further developments. That evening, Sullivan sat in his quarters reviewing the day's test results, the envelope of photographs resting on his desk like a physical manifestation of his growing concerns. The phone rang, interrupting his troubled thoughts. Sullivan, he answered. It's Linda, his wife's voice came through, sounding more relaxed than during their last conversation. Michael wanted me to call. He pitched another complete game today. Sullivan felt the familiar mixture of pride and regret. That's fantastic. Put him on. Michael's voice came through a moment later, excited and animated as he described his performance. Coach says I might get to start the championship game next weekend. You're still coming, right, Dad? Absolutely, Sullivan affirmed. I've already arranged the leave. Nothing will keep me from being there. After speaking with Michael, Sullivan exchanged a few more words with Linda, noticing a warming in her tone that suggested their recent conversation had begun healing some of the distance between them. When he hung up, Sullivan returned to his review of the test results with renewed determination. Whatever complexities surrounded the Wildcat project, he was committed to completing his assignment with integrity and returning to his family as promised. The next morning dawned with unexpected developments. Sullivan arrived at the facility to find General Harrington engaged in intense discussion with Jenkins from the State Department and a new arrival, a stern-looking man in an Air Force colonel's uniform. Captain Sullivan, Harrington called out, gesturing him over. This is Colonel Frank Reynolds from Defense Advanced Research Projects. He'll be observing our progress for the remainder of the project. Reynolds offered a perfunctory handshake, his assessing gaze taking Sullivan's measure. Captain, I've reviewed your combat record and test reports. Impressive field experience, though your technical background is somewhat limited. The implied criticism was clear, but Sullivan maintained his professional demeanor. I leave the engineering expertise to Lieutenant Daniels and Dr. Winters, sir. My focus is operational capabilities and tactical applications. As it should be, Reynolds responded with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm particularly interested in the comparative analysis between the Wildcat and our existing inventory. The M113 already fulfills many of the roles you're proposing for this vehicle. Sullivan recognized the challenge inherent in the statement. The M113 is an excellent vehicle within its design parameters, Colonel. The Wildcat offers complementary capabilities, particularly in terms of air transportability, reduced logistical footprint, and cost-effectiveness for our allies with limited infrastructure. Reynolds nodded noncommittally. We'll see what the data indicates. I'll be conducting an independent assessment alongside your scheduled testing. As Reynolds departed with Jenkins to tour the facility, Harrington lingered behind with Sullivan. Reynolds represents powerful interests within the Pentagon, Harrington explained quietly. His presence here isn't coincidental after Senator Daniels' visit. Opposition to the Wildcat concept, Sullivan surmised. Among other concerns, Harrington confirmed. Proceed with testing as planned, but expect increased scrutiny of every aspect of our operation. The day's schedule called for extended endurance testing, pushing the Wildcat through a series of long-distance operations to evaluate reliability under sustained use. Sullivan found Sergeant Wilkins already preparing the vehicle, his experienced hands performing final checks on the engine. Morning, Captain, Wilkins greeted him. Got her ready for the marathon. Full tanks, fresh oil, all systems checked. Any concerns about the extended run? Sullivan asked, conducting his own visual inspection. Wilkins shook his head. She's solid. Lieutenant Daniels' transmission modifications have eliminated our main weakness. Dr. Winters even provided some special lubricant compound for the drive sprockets that should reduce wear during long operations. Sullivan nodded, though the mention of Dr. Winters triggered his awareness of the surveillance photographs. Where is the lieutenant this morning? Already at the test course laying out the route markers with Rodriguez, Wilkins replied. Dr. Winters is in her lab prepping some new armor samples for ballistic testing later today. The endurance test course covered approximately 50 miles of varied terrain, designed to simulate sustained operational conditions. Sullivan would drive the first 25 miles, with Daniels taking over for the second half. As Sullivan prepared to depart, he noticed Colonel Reynolds watching from the edge of the compound, making notes on a clipboard. The scrutiny was expected, but added another layer of pressure to the day's activities. Communications check, Sullivan announced once settled in the driver's position. Command post receiving, came Rodriguez's voice through the headset. Telemetry systems active. You're clear to proceed, Captain. Sullivan engaged the engine, which responded with the reliable purr they had refined over weeks of testing. He guided the Wildcat out of the compound and toward the first section of the course, a gravel road that would test suspension durability over rough surfaces. The vehicle handled precisely, its lightweight allowing it to skip over smaller obstacles that would jostle heavier vehicles. Sullivan maintained a steady pace, monitoring the engine temperature and transmission performance, as they had identified these as potential weak points during extended operations. 20 miles into the course, transitioning from gravel roads to cross-country terrain, Sullivan noticed the first signs of trouble. The temperature gauge began rising gradually, approaching but not yet entering the red zone. Command post, Wildcat actual, Sullivan reported. Engine temperature climbing. Currently at 85% of maximum operating threshold. Received Wildcat actual, Rodriguez responded. Telemetry confirms. Recommend reduced RPM if terrain permits. Sullivan throttled back slightly, which stabilized the temperature temporarily. However, as they approached the 25-mile mark, where he would hand over to Daniels, the gauge began rising again despite the reduced speed. Something's not right, Sullivan muttered to himself, scanning the other instruments for indications of the problem's source. The oil pressure remained normal, suggesting the issue wasn't lubrication-related. Fuel pressure was steady, eliminating that system from consideration. As he crested a hill overlooking the handover point, Sullivan spotted Lieutenant Daniels waiting with the support vehicle. He guided the Wildcat down the slope, the engine now producing a subtle but concerning variation in its normal sound. Command Post Wildcat Actual, approaching handover point. Engine temperature now at 90% threshold with reduced power. Recommend technical inspection before continuing. Concur, Wildcat Actual, came Sergeant Wilkins' voice, who had apparently joined the command post team. Describe any unusual engine sounds or vibrations. Sullivan provided a detailed description as he brought the vehicle to a halt near Daniels, who approached with a concerned expression. Temperature's high, Daniels observed, glancing at the gauges as Sullivan exited. I heard the pitch change on your final approach. Wilkins arrived moments later in the support vehicle, toolkit already in hand. Let's have a look, he said, moving directly to the engine access panels. What they discovered confirmed Sullivan's suspicions that something was fundamentally wrong. The coolant reservoir was nearly empty, though there were no visible leaks in the system. Wilkins removed the radiator cap cautiously and peered inside. There's your problem, he announced, pointing to a dark residue coating the radiator tubes. Coolant's been contaminated with something that's causing blockage in the cooling system. Radiator can't dissipate heat effectively. Daniels examined the residue. That's not normal corrosion or mineral buildup. This looks like a chemical reaction. Sullivan's mind immediately went to sabotage, though he kept this suspicion private for the moment. Can we flush the system and continue? Wilkins considered the question. We can perform a field flush, but I'd recommend returning to base for a complete cleaning. This could cause permanent damage if we push it. Agreed, Sullivan decided. Lieutenant Daniels, return to base with Sergeant Wilkins. I'll follow in the support vehicle. Report the mechanical issue, but keep speculation about causes to a minimum until we've conducted a thorough analysis. As they prepared to return, Sullivan noticed Rodriguez approaching on foot from a nearby observation point, his expression grim. Mechanical failure? Rodriguez inquired casually when he reached them. Cooling system contamination, Sullivan replied, watching the other man's reaction carefully. Appears to be a chemical reaction in the radiator. Rodriguez's expression revealed nothing beyond professional concern. Unfortunate timing with Colonel Reynolds observing. He'll undoubtedly include this in his assessment. Undoubtedly, Sullivan agreed, though mechanical issues during testing are hardly unusual. True, Rodriguez conceded, but convenient for those opposing the project. Back at the facility, the Wildcat's cooling system was subjected to thorough inspection. Wilkins supervised the process personally, methodically documenting each finding. It's definitely sabotage, he reported privately to Sullivan in the maintenance bay, voice lowered to avoid being overheard. Someone introduced a crystallizing agent into the coolant. It was designed to activate gradually with heat buildup, eventually causing complete blockage. If it had happened in the field without support nearby, the engine would have seized. Sullivan processed this disturbing confirmation. Any idea when it could have been introduced? Had to be sometime after yesterday's testing and before this morning's departure. The vehicle was secured in the hangar overnight, but there are at least a dozen people with access. Wilkins' weathered face showed genuine anger. This is professional work, Captain. Not some amateur trying to make a point. Sullivan nodded. Document everything, but keep your findings between us for now. I need to consider the implications before taking this further. The situation was complicated by Colonel Reynolds' presence. The mechanical failure played directly into the narrative of the Wildcat as an unreliable platform, and Sullivan suspected the timing was not coincidental. He found General Harrington in his office, already aware of the mechanical issue. Sergeant Wilkins reports cooling system contamination, Sullivan informed him, carefully gauging his response. Appears deliberate. Harrington's expression darkened. You're suggesting sabotage. That's a serious accusation, Captain. The evidence supports it, sir. Wilkins identified a crystallizing agent in the coolant system designed to cause progressive failure. I see. Harrington steepled his fingers, considering the implications. This stays between us for now. If word gets out that we're experiencing sabotage, Reynolds and his allies will use it as ammunition to terminate the project immediately. With respect, sir, if someone on the team is actively working against us, we need to identify them. And we will, Harrington assured him, but carefully without alerting the saboteur. Continue testing with enhanced security precautions. Rodriguez will coordinate additional surveillance of the maintenance areas. Sullivan left the meeting troubled by Harrington's controlled reaction. The general seemed neither surprised nor particularly outraged by the sabotage, suggesting he might have anticipated such developments. It added another layer to Sullivan's growing concerns about the project's true nature. His next step was to find Dr. Winters, whose special lubricant compound Wilkins had mentioned earlier. He located her in the ballistics laboratory, examining armor plates from their recent testing. "Doctor," Sullivan greeted her professionally, "do you have a moment to discuss the Wildcat's mechanical issue?" She looked up from her work, her expression carefully neutral. "Of course, Captain. I heard there was a cooling system failure during the endurance test." "Yes, Sergeant Wilkins found evidence of contamination." Sullivan watched her reaction closely. "He mentioned you provided a special lubricant compound for this morning's test." "For the drive sprockets, yes," she confirmed without hesitation. "A graphite-based formulation to reduce friction and wear during extended operations. It wouldn't have any interaction with the cooling system." Sullivan maintained a conversational tone. "Who else knew about the endurance test specifications in advance?" Dr. Winters considered the question. "The entire core team, of course. Lieutenant Daniels helped design the test parameters. Sergeant Wilkins prepared the vehicle. Mr. Jenkins observed some of the preparations yesterday afternoon, and Colonel Reynolds requested the test schedule upon his arrival." She paused. "Why do you ask?" "Just establishing a timeline," Sullivan replied noncommittally. "The cooling system will need complete replacement, which delays our testing schedule." "That's unfortunate, especially with Colonel Reynolds evaluating the project." De Winters returned to her armor plates, her manner suggesting the conversation was concluded. As Sullivan departed, he noticed Jenkins watching from across the compound, his attention apparently focused on Sullivan's interaction with Dr. Winters. The State Department observer's constant presence at key moments increasingly struck Sullivan as purposeful rather than coincidental. The remainder of the day was devoted to repairing the Wildcat's cooling system. Sullivan used the opportunity to implement additional security measures, including having Wilkins install a discreet recording device in the maintenance bay and establishing a rotating guard schedule among team members he trusted. That evening, Sullivan received an unexpected visitor at his quarters. Lieutenant Daniels knocked on his door shortly after dinner, his expression suggesting urgent business. "Lieutenant," Sullivan greeted him with surprise. "What brings you here?" "May I come in, sir? What I have to discuss shouldn't be overheard." Sullivan gestured him inside, curiosity piqued by the young officer's uncharacteristic intensity. Daniels spoke in a low voice once the door was closed. "My father called me this afternoon. He's been making inquiries about the Wildcat project in Washington." He hesitated. "What he discovered concerns me deeply." "Go on," Sullivan encouraged, maintaining a neutral expression despite his growing interest. "The funding authorization for this project bypassed normal Pentagon channels. It's being financed through a special appropriation tied to a classified State Department initiative." Daniels ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of genuine distress. "And the original design specifications weren't developed internally, as I was told. They were acquired from a foreign source under circumstances that might violate international agreements." This confirmation of Rodriguez's earlier revelations heightened Sullivan's concerns, though he kept his expression impassive. "That's a serious allegation, Lieutenant. What's your source beyond your father?" "I did my own research after his call," Daniels admitted. "Examined the original engineering drawings more carefully. There are notations in Cyrillic that were incompletely erased before translation, and material specifications that don't align with standard American military nomenclature." Sullivan nodded slowly, impressed by the young officer's initiative and courage in bringing this forward. "What do you intend to do with this information?" Daniels seemed conflicted. "That's why I came to you, sir. My father wants me to document everything and provide it for a potential Armed Services Committee investigation. But I'm not sure that's the right approach." He met Sullivan's gaze directly. "Despite these irregularities, I've come to believe in the Wildcat's potential, and I'm not convinced my father's motivations are entirely about proper procedure." Sullivan considered his response carefully, aware of the delicate position they both occupied. Sometimes in military development, the lines between innovation and appropriation blur, especially during the Cold War. The critical question is whether the Wildcat serves American interests and provides our forces with valuable capabilities. I believe it does, Daniel stated with surprising conviction. Its performance characteristics address gaps in our current inventory that I hadn't fully appreciated before working directly with the platform. Then perhaps the most responsible course is to complete our evaluation while maintaining awareness of these concerns, Sullivan suggested. Document everything professionally, but reserve judgment until we have a complete picture. Daniels nodded, appearing relieved by this measured approach. That makes sense, sir. Thank you. He hesitated before adding, there's something else you should know. Colonel Reynolds and Mr. Jenkins met privately with Dr. Winters this afternoon after you left the lab. They seemed extremely interested in her armor composition testing. This new information added another piece to the increasingly complex puzzle surrounding the project. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Lieutenant. Continue your excellent work on the vehicle systems, but keep your observations discreet for now. After Daniels departed, Sullivan sat at his desk, mentally mapping the connections and inconsistencies accumulating around the Wildcat project. Someone had sabotaged the vehicle at a critical moment in testing. Dr. Winters was possibly engaged in unauthorized communications with foreign operatives. Jenkins from State Department seemed to be monitoring her activities while simultaneously conferring with Colonel Reynolds, who represented Pentagon interests opposed to the project. And at the center stood General Harrington, whose motivations and true objectives remained opaque despite his apparent championing of the Wildcat concept. Sullivan's phone rang, interrupting his contemplation. It was Rodriguez. We need to meet, the intelligence officer said without preamble. Not at the facility, the Silver Spur Diner in Killeen in 30 minutes. What's this about? Sullivan asked, though he suspected the answer. Developments you need to be aware of, Rodriguez replied cryptically. Come alone and don't mention this to anyone. The Silver Spur Diner was a nondescript establishment catering to soldiers from Fort Hood, busy enough to provide anonymity, but not so crowded that private conversations were impossible. Sullivan arrived to find Rodriguez already seated in a corner booth, a cup of coffee before him. Thanks for coming, Rodriguez greeted him as Sullivan slid into the seat opposite. Ordered you coffee. Figured you could use it. Sullivan nodded his thanks. What's so urgent it requires this level of secrecy? Rodriguez glanced around before responding, confirming they weren't being observed. Two things. First, I've identified the likely saboteur of the Wildcat's cooling system. One of the maintenance technicians assigned last week, Wilson, was observed accessing the vehicle during the night shift when no testing was scheduled. You had the maintenance bay under surveillance? Sullivan asked, surprised. I have most areas of the facility under surveillance, Rodriguez admitted without apology. Standard procedure for counterintelligence on classified projects. And the second thing? Rodriguez reached into his jacket and withdrew a small envelope, sliding it across the table. This was intercepted yesterday, Dr. Winters attempting to mail it from an off-base post office rather than through official channels. Sullivan opened the envelope to find microfiche slides containing what appeared to be technical specifications for the Wildcat's armor composition. The address is a front company in Austria known to channel technical information to Warsaw Pact intelligence services, Rodriguez explained quietly. This confirms our suspicions about Dr. Winters. Sullivan studied the microfilm slides, his expression grim. Have you informed General Harrington? Not yet, Rodriguez admitted, and that's where things get complicated. I'm not entirely confident in the General's position in all this. This statement aligned with Sullivan's growing concerns. Explain. Rodriguez sipped his coffee before continuing. Harrington's career path has included several assignments that overlap with known intelligence operations. His expertise in Soviet armor technology exceeds what would be expected from conventional military experience, and his personnel file contains significant redacted sections from the late 1950s. You're suggesting he's intelligence rather than regular army, Sullivan deduced. I'm suggesting the Wildcat project may have objectives beyond developing a new armored vehicle, Rodriguez clarified. Counterintelligence operations sometimes use technical projects as cover for identifying and monitoring foreign agents. The implications were significant. You think Dr. Winters is being allowed to operate as a double agent? That the sabotage is being permitted to maintain her cover? Rodriguez nodded. It's a standard technique, limited compromise of actual technology to maintain access to higher-value intelligence targets. Sullivan processed this disturbing possibility. Where does that leave the legitimate aspects of the Wildcat development? The vehicle itself has proven tactical value. That's the question, isn't it? Rodriguez acknowledged. Is the vehicle the actual objective or merely the cover for intelligence operations? Only Harrington knows for certain. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their food, forcing a temporary shift to mundane topics. When the waitress departed, Sullivan returned to the central question. What do you recommend we do with this information about Dr. Winters? Continue as if unaware for now, Rodriguez advised. I've contained the immediate security breach by intercepting the microfiche. We need to understand the full scope of the operation before taking action that might compromise higher objectives. Sullivan nodded slowly, though the approach conflicted with his straightforward military instincts. And the vehicle saboteur? Being monitored closely. If he attempts further sabotage, we'll intervene discreetly. His connections might lead us to others involved. As they finished their meal and prepared to leave separately, Sullivan considered his position carefully. One last question. Where do your true loyalties lie in all this, Rodriguez? You've presented yourself variously as weapons specialist, intelligence officer, and now counterintelligence. Who do you actually work for? Rodriguez smiled thinly. I serve the same country you do, Captain, just from a different angle. He stood to leave. Trust your instincts about the people around you. They've kept you alive this long. The following morning brought new challenges. Upon arriving at the facility, Sullivan found Colonel Reynolds conducting what appeared to be an impromptu inspection of the Wildcat's technical documentation with several assistants who had not been present previously. Captain Sullivan, Reynolds greeted him with professional formality. I've been reviewing the performance data from previous tests. There are concerning inconsistencies between the reported capabilities and the raw telemetry recordings. Sullivan maintained his composure despite the implied accusation. All test reports accurately reflect observed performance, Colonel. Any specific concerns can be addressed through formal review procedures. Indeed, Reynolds responded coolly, which is why I've requested technical staff from Aberdeen Proving Ground to conduct independent verification of the Wildcat's capabilities once repairs are complete. This represented a significant escalation in official scrutiny. Sullivan nodded professionally. We welcome thorough evaluation. The Wildcat's performance speaks for itself. We'll see, Reynolds replied, his tone suggesting skepticism. I'm particularly interested in the armor protection levels claimed in Dr. Winters' reports. They exceed theoretical maximums for materials of this composition and thickness. Sullivan recalled Dr. Winters' own surprise at the armor's unexpectedly superior performance during testing. Dr. Winters is a recognized expert in composite armor technologies. Her innovations may well exceed previous theoretical limitations. Or her reports may be exaggerated, Reynolds countered bluntly. Science has boundaries, Captain, even in classified research. Their tense exchange was interrupted by the arrival of General Harrington, accompanied by Jenkins and, surprisingly, Senator Daniels, who had apparently returned to Fort Hood. Captain Sullivan, Harrington called out, gesturing him over. Join us for a moment. Sullivan excused himself from Reynolds and approached the group, noting the unusual formality in Harrington's manner. Senator Daniels has expressed continued interest in our project following his son's reports, Harrington explained. He'll be observing today's activities alongside Colonel Reynolds' technical team. The senator nodded cordially to Sullivan. Captain, my son speaks highly of your leadership during the recent mechanical challenges. Lieutenant Daniels has been instrumental in resolving those issues, sir, Sullivan responded diplomatically, though he wondered about the senator's true motivation for returning. I understand we're conducting ballistic testing of the armor system today, the senator continued, a critical aspect of any combat vehicle's capabilities. Yes, sir, Dr. Winters has prepared a comprehensive demonstration of the Wildcat's protective systems against various threat levels. Excellent, the senator replied with what seemed genuine interest. I look forward to observing firsthand. As the group moved toward the conference room for the morning briefing, Sullivan found himself walking alongside Jenkins, who spoke quietly enough that only Sullivan could hear. Be cautious today, Captain. Multiple agendas are converging, not all of them transparent. Before Sullivan could respond to this cryptic warning, Jenkins accelerated his pace to join Harrington at the front of the group, leaving Sullivan to wonder about the State Department representative's true position in the increasingly complex situation. The morning briefing was tense, with Colonel Reynolds questioning several aspects of the test protocols. Dr. Winters defended her methodology with professional confidence, though Sullivan noticed she avoided directly addressing questions about theoretical material limitations. Lieutenant Daniels presented the repairs to the cooling system, diplomatically characterizing the failure as a design refinement opportunity rather than the result of sabotage. Sergeant Wilkins confirmed the vehicle was again operational and ready for testing. Today's schedule includes ballistic evaluation followed by a combined mobility and weapons demonstration, Sullivan concluded, addressing the assembled group. We'll be testing against standardized NATO threat profiles, from small arms through heavy machine gun calibers, with particular focus on the 14.5 millimeter Soviet heavy machine gun round that represents the most common threat this vehicle class would encounter. Colonel Reynolds interjected, I've modified the test protocol to include RPG simulation charges. If this vehicle is intended for environments where Soviet-supplied equipment is prevalent, rocket-propelled grenades represent a significant threat. This addition significantly raised the standards the Wildcat would need to meet. Sullivan glanced at Dr. Winters, whose expression revealed momentary concern before returning to professional neutrality. We haven't previously tested against RPG threats, Sullivan noted. The Wildcat's design parameters specifically acknowledge vulnerability to anti-tank weapons as a trade-off for mobility and cost advantages. Nevertheless, Reynolds insisted, any combat vehicle must demonstrate at least survival capabilities against prevalent battlefield threats. The crew may not survive a direct hit, but we should understand whether the vehicle remains operational afterward. General Harrington intervened smoothly. We'll incorporate Colonel Reynolds' suggestion as an informational test. Understanding it exceeds the Wildcat's design parameters. Knowledge of performance limits is valuable regardless of expectations. With the expanded testing protocol established, they proceeded to the range where armored test panels had been arranged to simulate the Wildcat's protection scheme. Each panel would be subjected to increasingly powerful ballistic threats to determine penetration thresholds. Dr. Winters supervised the arrangement of the panels, conferring occasionally with her technical assistants. Sullivan noticed she seemed particularly attentive to the positioning of specific panels, suggesting they might have special characteristics. The testing began with standard small arms ammunition, which the armor defeated easily as expected. As they progressed to heavier calibers, Sullivan observed the various officials watching with different expressions of interest. Senator Daniels seemed genuinely curious about the technical aspects, while Reynolds maintained an air of skeptical assessment. Jenkins observed silently, his attention divided between the tests and the interactions among the participants. When they reached the critical 14.5 millimeter test, representing the Soviet heavy machine gun threat, tension visibly increased. This represented the practical threshold for light armor protection and would demonstrate whether the Wildcat could realistically survive in its intended operational environment. Firing 14.5 millimeter test round, announced the range officer. The heavy bullet struck the test panel with significant force, creating a visible impact deformation but failing to penetrate completely. Dr. Winters approached to examine the results, her expression revealing professional satisfaction. No penetration, she reported officially. The ceramic disruption layer functioned as designed, dissipating energy before the round reached the structural backing. Colonel Reynolds examined the panel personally, his skepticism evident. The deformation is significant. In a real vehicle, this would likely cause spalling on the interior surface, potentially injuring the crew even without penetration. Our interior surfaces include anti-spall liners specifically to address that concern, Dr. Winters countered smoothly. The complete protection system includes multiple complementary layers. Reynolds nodded non-committally before turning to his assistants. Proceed with the RPG simulation. This represented the most challenging test, deliberately exceeding the Wildcat's design parameters. A shaped charge device simulating the effect of an RPG warhead was positioned at the standard attack distance from a fresh armor panel. Everyone moved to the protected observation bunker for this high-explosive test. RPG simulation firing in 3, 2, 1, announced the range officer before triggering the detonation. The explosion was impressive, sending fragments of the test fixture flying. When the smoke cleared, the result was unambiguous. The armor panel had been completely penetrated, with a charred hole approximately 6 inches in diameter, marking the path of the shaped charge jet. Complete penetration, as expected, Reynolds noted with satisfaction. In a combat vehicle, this would represent catastrophic damage and probable crew casualties. Dr. Winters examined the damage with professional interest rather than disappointment. The penetration is actually smaller than projected models would predict for this threat. The dissipation characteristics of the composite are performing better than theoretical calculations suggested. Sullivan recognized her subtle reframing of the result from failure to partial success. a common technique in research presentations. Colonel Reynolds appeared unimpressed by the distinction. The fact remains that the vehicle provides inadequate protection against a common battlefield threat, Reynolds stated firmly. This raises serious questions about its suitability for deployment in contested environments. With respect, Colonel, Sullivan interjected, no vehicle in this weight class worldwide provides protection against shaped charges without explosive reactive armor or active protection systems, which would compromise the Wildcat's core mobility and cost advantages. These results align with our established performance parameters and operational concept. Captain Sullivan is correct, General Harrington supported. We've been transparent that the Wildcat represents specific capability traits, emphasizing mobility, deployability, and cost-effectiveness over maximum protection. Its tactical employment doctrine accounts for these limitations. The debate might have continued, but they were interrupted by Sergeant Wilkins approaching at a hurried pace. Captain Sullivan? Wilkins called out, his expression concerned. There's been an incident at the maintenance bay. Someone attempted to access the Wildcat's electronic systems. The security measures you implemented detected the intrusion. Sullivan exchanged glances with Rodriguez, who had remained in the background during the testing. Who? One of Colonel Reynolds' technical specialists, Wilkins reported, claims he was conducting authorized verification of the performance monitoring systems. All eyes turned to Colonel Reynolds, whose expression revealed momentary discomfort before settling into bureaucratic formality. My team has authorization to verify all technical aspects of the vehicle as part of our independent assessment. Access to the vehicle requires coordination through the project leadership, General Harrington stated firmly. I'd appreciate advance notification of such requirements in the future, Colonel. Reynolds nodded stiffly. Of course, General, a misunderstanding of protocols. Sullivan wasn't convinced by this explanation, but maintained his professional demeanor. Sergeant Wilkins, escort Colonel Reynolds' specialist back to the vehicle. We'll continue with the scheduled demonstration after completing the ballistic tests. As they resumed testing, Sullivan noticed Jenkins observing the exchange with particular interest, making notes in a small book he carried. The State Department representative's role in the project remained ambiguous, but his attention to interpersonal dynamics suggested he was evaluating personnel as much as technical performance. The remainder of the ballistic test proceeded without further incident, establishing a clear performance profile for the Wildcat's armor system. It provided excellent protection against small arms and adequate defense against heavy machine guns, but as expected, remained vulnerable to dedicated anti-tank weapons. Following a brief lunch break, they reassembled for the combined mobility and weapons demonstration. The repaired Wildcat performed flawlessly, showcasing its agility through the obstacle course and the effectiveness of its weapons systems against simulated targets. Throughout, Sullivan found himself watching not just the vehicle, but the observers. Senator Daniels appeared increasingly impressed by the Wildcat's capabilities. Colonel Reynolds maintained his skeptical assessment, though Sullivan noted he paid particular attention to the TOW missile integration. Jenkins observed everything with enigmatic interest, occasionally conferring quietly with General Harrington. At day's end, Sullivan found himself mentally exhausted from navigating both the technical challenges and the political currents surrounding the project. As he completed his test reports in his office, a knock at the door announced Lieutenant Daniels. "Come in," Sullivan called. Daniels entered, closing the door behind him. "Sir, I thought you should know my father has requested a private conversation with you tomorrow morning. He was impressed by today's demonstration, despite his initial skepticism." "That's encouraging," Sullivan replied. "Did he mention specific interests?" "Only that he has questions about the project's strategic implications rather than technical details." Daniels hesitated. "I believe he's reconsidering his opposition to the Wildcat concept, though he remains concerned about procedural irregularities." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for the heads up, Lieutenant. Your father's support could be significant for the project's future." After Daniels departed, Sullivan turned his attention to the growing collection of information and observations he had accumulated about the project and its participants. Something significant was occurring beneath the surface of the Wildcat development effort, with multiple agendas intersecting in ways he didn't fully understand. The sabotage attempt, Dr. Winter's suspicious activities, Colonel Reynolds' aggressive scrutiny, and Jenkins' ambiguous oversight created a complex tapestry of conflicting interests. General Harrington stood at the center, apparently promoting the Wildcat while potentially using it as cover for intelligence operations. And Sullivan himself occupied an increasingly precarious position, responsible for the vehicle's legitimate development while becoming entangled in apparent espionage activities. His military career, professional reputation, and personal integrity were all potentially at risk depending on how he navigated the situation. As he gathered his materials to return to his quarters, Sullivan's thoughts turned to his family. He had promised Michael he would attend his championship game that weekend, a commitment he intended to honor regardless of the project's complications. Whatever was happening with the Wildcat, Sullivan was determined not to sacrifice his relationship with his son on the altar of military duty as he had too often in the past. His phone rang as he was preparing to leave. "Sullivan," he answered. "It's Rodriguez. Meet me at the same location in 1 hour. Developments you need to be aware of immediately." The urgency in Rodriguez's voice suggested significant new information. "I'll be there," Sullivan confirmed, his mind already racing with possibilities as he gathered his things and headed for his car, the weight of accumulated secrets and suspicions heavy on his shoulders. The Wildcat project had transformed from a straightforward vehicle development assignment into something far more dangerous and complex. Whatever revelations awaited him at the Silver Spur Diner, Sullivan suspected they would only deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. And somewhere within that mystery lay threats not just to a military project, but potentially to national security and perhaps to Sullivan himself. The Silver Spur Diner hummed with the quiet conversations of off-duty soldiers when Captain Jack Sullivan entered, scanning the room until he spotted Rodriguez in the same corner booth as before. The intelligence officer's expression was unusually grave, his customary cigarette untouched beside an empty coffee cup. "Thanks for coming," Rodriguez said as Sullivan slid into the seat opposite him. "Coffee?" "I'm fine," Sullivan declined, studying the other man's face. "What's so urgent?" Rodriguez glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard before leaning forward. "We've identified a coordinated effort to compromise the Wildcat project. It's more sophisticated than we initially believed." "Elaborate," Sullivan prompted, his full attention engaged. "The sabotage of the cooling system was just a distraction," Rodriguez explained quietly. While attention was focused on that, someone accessed Dr. Winter's secure files and copied her latest armor formulations. He paused. "But here's where it gets interesting. The files were deliberately altered before being copied, containing fatal flaws that wouldn't be apparent until actual production." Sullivan processed this information, a long-term sabotage strategy, allowing whoever stole the data to believe they'd acquired valuable technology, when in fact, they'd be implementing a fundamentally flawed design, Rodriguez finished. "Exactly. It's a classic counterintelligence technique. Feed the opposition compromised information that appears legitimate." "And Dr. Winters?" Sullivan asked, recalling the suspicious photographs he'd been shown. Rodriguez's expression remained unreadable. "That's where things become complicated. We've been monitoring her communications. She's been in contact with foreign intelligence, but under direct authorization from higher authorities. She's running a sanctioned deception operation," Sullivan concluded. "Correct. The Wildcat project serves multiple objectives. Its technical merits are genuine, but it also functions as a controlled channel for feeding selected technology to foreign intelligence services." Sullivan frowned. "Where does that leave the legitimate aspects of the vehicle development? The tactical capabilities have real potential." "That's why you're here," Rodriguez said. "General Harrington values your honest assessment of the Wildcat's military utility, separate from the intelligence aspects. Your reports are being taken seriously at the highest levels of the Pentagon." Before Sullivan could respond, he noticed Rodriguez's attention shift slightly, focusing on something over Sullivan's shoulder. The intelligence officer continued speaking in the same conversational tone, but the subject abruptly changed. "So anyway, that fishing spot near Belton Lake I mentioned is really productive this time of year," he said, louder than necessary. "You should try it this weekend." Sullivan understood the warning and played along. "I might do that. My son would enjoy it." A moment later, a man Sullivan recognized as one of Colonel Reynolds' technical specialists passed their booth, nodding casually in acknowledgement before continuing to a table across the room. When the man was out of earshot, Rodriguez spoke again, his voice barely audible. "We're being watched more closely than I anticipated. Reynolds has assigned surveillance to key project personnel." "Official Pentagon oversight or something else?" Sullivan asked quietly. "That's the question," Rodriguez replied. "Reynolds' credentials are impeccable, but his team includes individuals with connections to defense contractors competing for the XM1 contract. Sullivan nodded, understanding the implications. Industrial espionage disguised as security concerns. The Wildcat threatens significant defense contracts if it proves a viable alternative for certain missions. Precisely, Rodriguez confirmed. Tomorrow's meeting with Senator Daniels is crucial. Despite his son's involvement, the senator has substantial investments in companies competing for the XM1 program. Sullivan absorbed this information. The complex web of military necessity, intelligence operations, and corporate interests becoming clearer. What's your recommendation? Proceed with the demonstration as planned. Focus on the Wildcat's unique capabilities rather than direct comparisons to the XM1. They serve different purposes, and emphasizing that distinction might mitigate some opposition. As they prepared to leave separately to avoid drawing attention, Rodriguez handed Sullivan a small envelope. One more thing you should know, this was intercepted from Reynolds' office last night. Inside, Sullivan found photographs of himself leaving the base to visit his family, along with notes about his son Michael's school and activities. The implied threat was unmistakable. They're attempting to pressure you, Rodriguez explained unnecessarily. Standard tactic when professional leverage is insufficient. Sullivan felt cold anger settle in his chest, carefully controlled but potent. They've miscalculated. I don't respond well to threats, especially ones involving my family. Rodriguez nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. I thought you should be warned. Security has been arranged for your family without their knowledge. They're protected. Thank you, Sullivan said sincerely, returning the envelope. One final recommendation, Rodriguez added, as they stood to leave. Trust Sergeant Wilkins and Lieutenant Daniels. Both have been thoroughly vetted. Everyone else should be considered compromised until proven otherwise. Sullivan returned to his quarters with his mind racing, the layers of complexity surrounding the Wildcat project seemingly multiplying with each new revelation. What had begun as a straightforward vehicle development assignment had evolved into something far more dangerous and consequential. Sleep proved elusive as he contemplated his position. His military duty demanded completing the assignment with integrity. His responsibility to his team required protecting those under his command. His family's safety had now been implicitly threatened, and somewhere within this web of competing interests lay the truth about the Wildcat itself, a vehicle whose genuine tactical value had become obscured by the machinations surrounding it. Morning arrived with clear skies and the promise of another scorching Texas day. Sullivan prepared himself carefully for the meeting with Senator Daniels, recognizing its potential significance for the project's future. The senator was waiting in a small conference room adjacent to General Harrington's office, reviewing documents when Sullivan arrived. Captain Sullivan, the senator greeted him, rising to shake hands. Thank you for making time. Of course, Senator, I understand you have questions about the Wildcat project. Indeed. The senator gestured for Sullivan to be seated. Let me be direct, Captain. My initial assessment of this project was skeptical at best. It appeared to be a distraction from the crucial XM1 program that represents the future of American armored warfare. Sullivan nodded. A reasonable perspective, sir. However, the senator continued, my son's reports and my own observations yesterday have forced me to reconsider. The Wildcat's performance in urban environments and restricted terrain was impressive. More importantly, its cost profile offers possibilities for equipping allies that could never afford modern main battle tanks. Sullivan recognized the opening. The Wildcat was never intended to replace or compete with main battle tanks, Senator. It's designed to complement them by fulfilling specialized roles where heavy armor is disadvantageous or logistically impractical. The senator nodded thoughtfully. So I've come to understand, but questions remain about the project's origins and oversight. He leaned forward slightly. Off the record, Captain, are you aware of the technology sourcing concerns surrounding the Wildcat? Sullivan considered his response carefully. I understand certain design elements may have been derived from foreign concepts, Senator. In military development, this is not unprecedented. We've historically adapted enemy technology when it offered advantages. A diplomatic answer, the senator acknowledged with a thin smile. Let me be more specific. This project has bypassed normal Pentagon procurement channels, utilizing State Department funding through classified programs. That raises red flags. Military development takes many paths, Senator. Sometimes unconventional approaches yield valuable results. The senator studied him thoughtfully. You're loyal, Captain, I respect that. But loyalty should be to country first, not to specific programs or individuals. He paused. What if I told you General Harrington's interest in this project extends beyond its military applications? That there are intelligence implications you may not be fully aware of? Sullivan maintained a neutral expression. I would say that in matters of national security, compartmentalization is sometimes necessary. My focus remains on the vehicle's tactical utility. The senator nodded slowly. A professional answer. But consider this. If the Wildcat project is serving multiple masters, its fundamental military value may be compromised by other priorities. As a combat officer, doesn't that concern you? It was a perceptive question that struck at Sullivan's own private concerns. Any technology serving multiple purposes must balance competing requirements, Senator. The crucial question is whether the Wildcat, as currently configured, provides valuable capabilities to American forces and our allies. My professional assessment is that it does, regardless of any ancillary functions it might serve. The senator seemed to appreciate Sullivan's candor. Fair enough, Captain. I have one final question, and I'd appreciate complete honesty. If you were voting on funding for further development of the Wildcat concept based solely on its military merits, how would you vote? Sullivan didn't hesitate. I would approve continued development with specific focus on refining its reconnaissance and fire support capabilities for specialized operational environments. The concept is sound, the performance promising, and the cost profile advantageous for wide deployment. The senator nodded, apparently satisfied. Thank you, Captain. Your perspective is valuable. He gathered his papers, indicating the meeting was concluding. I'll be observing today's final demonstration with great interest. As Sullivan rose to leave, the senator added, one more thing, Captain. I understand your son has a championship baseball game this weekend. Marcus mentioned you've arranged leave to attend. The seemingly casual reference to his family sent a warning signal through Sullivan's mind, especially after the photographs Rodriguez had shown him. That's correct, Senator. Family commitments are important, the senator said, his tone difficult to interpret. I wish I'd attended more of Marcus' games when he was younger. The time passes quickly. Sullivan departed the meeting with mixed impressions. The senator appeared genuinely interested in the Wildcat's military potential, yet the reference to Sullivan's family carried uncomfortable undertones, especially in light of Rodriguez's warnings. Outside headquarters, Sullivan found Sergeant Wilkins waiting, his weathered face bearing an expression of concern. Problem with the Wildcat, Sergeant? Sullivan inquired. Not with the vehicle, sir, Wilkins replied quietly. But there's something you should see in the maintenance bay. In the relative privacy of the maintenance area, Wilkins led Sullivan to a workbench where components from the Wildcat's transmission lay partially disassembled. Routine maintenance check before today's demonstration, Wilkins explained. But look at this. He pointed to fine scratches on a critical gear assembly. Someone's introduced metal filings into the lubrication system. Not enough to cause immediate failure, but sufficient to guarantee breakdown after approximately 1 hour of operation. Sullivan examined the evidence of sabotage, his expression hardening. When would this have been done? Sometime after yesterday's testing. The vehicle was under guard, but there was a 30-minute shift change window when access was possible. Wilkins wiped his hands on a rag. I've replaced the affected components and checked every system twice. She's clean now. Good work, Sullivan commended him. Have you reported this to General Harrington? Not yet, sir. Thought you should see it first. Sullivan nodded. Keep this between us for now. Document everything but continue preparations as normal. I don't want to alert whoever is responsible that we've discovered the sabotage. Sullivan's next stop was the armory, where Rodriguez was supervising the preparation of ammunition for the day's demonstration. A word? Sullivan requested, guiding the intelligence officer to a private corner. After Sullivan described the sabotage attempt, Rodriguez's expression darkened. They're getting desperate. The transmission failure would have occurred during the critical phase of today's demonstration, with all principal observers present, including Senator Daniels, Sullivan noted, whose position seems to be evolving in favor of the project, making him a potential target as well, Rodriguez concluded. The senator's support could be decisive in securing future funding. Sullivan considered the implications. We need to ensure today's demonstration proceeds without interference. The Wildcat's performance must speak for itself, without distractions or sabotage. Rodriguez nodded. I'll arrange additional security, discreetly. And Captain, he added, watch your back. If they can't stop the project, they might target key personnel instead. The morning proceeded with final preparations for the comprehensive demonstration scheduled that afternoon. Lieutenant Daniels supervised the Wildcat's electronics check, while Dr. Winters prepared the latest armor samples for ballistic comparison tests. Sullivan found himself observing not just the technical preparations, but the interactions among the various participants. Colonel Reynolds maintained his veneer of professional skepticism, while his technical team conducted their own inspections. Jenkins from State Department observed everything with enigmatic interest, occasionally conferring quietly with General Harrington. Senator Daniels had returned, accompanied by two aides who took extensive notes. By early afternoon, they had assembled at the demonstration range, where the Wildcat waited, its compact form gleaming under the Texas sun. The observation stands were filled with military officials, technical specialists, and representatives from various Pentagon departments who had arrived that morning. General Harrington opened the proceedings with a brief overview of the project's objectives and the day's demonstration parameters. The Wildcat represents an approach to armored warfare that emphasizes mobility, deployability, and cost-effectiveness over raw firepower and heavy protection, he explained. Today's demonstration will illustrate how these design principles translate into tactical advantages in specific operational environments. Colonel Reynolds followed with a more technical briefing outlining the evaluation criteria his team would be applying. His tone remained professionally neutral, but Sullivan detected underlying skepticism in his framing of the vehicle's capabilities. Captain Sullivan will command the vehicle during the tactical demonstration, Harrington announced. Lieutenant Daniels will serve as driver. The course includes urban operations, restricted terrain navigation, and simulated combat engagements against various threat levels. Sullivan and Daniels approached the Wildcat, conducting final pre-operation checks before climbing aboard. The interior was cramped but functional, each control positioned for maximum efficiency within the limited space. "Communications check," Sullivan announced into his headset. "Command post receiving," came Rodriguez's voice. "Telemetry systems active. You're clear to proceed." Sullivan glanced at Daniels. "Ready, Lieutenant?" "Ready, sir," Daniels confirmed, his expression focused. The demonstration began with basic mobility exercises, showcasing the Wildcat's speed and agility across various terrain types. Sullivan directed Daniels through a series of maneuvers designed to highlight the vehicle's advantages over larger armored platforms. Next came the urban operations phase, where the Wildcat navigated a mock cityscape constructed from shipping containers and concrete barriers. Here, the vehicle's compact size proved decisively advantageous, allowing it to access confined spaces that would immobilize conventional tanks. "Approaching ambush zone," Sullivan announced, transitioning to the combat demonstration phase, engaging targets as they appear. Simulated enemy positions activated throughout the urban setting, presenting a complex tactical challenge. Sullivan operated the weapon systems with practice efficiency, engaging targets with the mounted machine gun, while Daniels maneuvered the vehicle between cover positions. When a simulated RPG team appeared at close range, Sullivan demonstrated the Wildcat's emergency maneuver capability, directing Daniels to execute a rapid reverse turn that placed a concrete barrier between them and the threat within seconds. "That's not in the standard protocol," Rodriguez noted over the radio, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Adapting to battlefield conditions," Sullivan replied calmly, knowing the observers would appreciate the realistic tactical decision-making. The demonstration continued with the TOW missile engagement phase, where Sullivan acquired and neutralized simulated armored targets at extended ranges. The Wildcat's stability as a missile platform proved exceptional, allowing precise targeting even after rapid position changes. Throughout, Sullivan maintained situational awareness not just of the demonstration scenario, but of the vehicle's actual performance. He monitored for any signs of the sabotage they had discovered and neutralized, but the Wildcat performed flawlessly, a testament to Sergeant Wilkins's thorough work. As they approached the final phase of the demonstration, Sullivan noticed unusual readings on the thermal monitoring system. "Command post, we're showing elevated temperatures in the left track assembly. Confirm with external sensors." "Confirmed," Rodriguez responded after a moment. "Thermal imaging shows localized heating. Possible bearing failure." Sullivan made a rapid assessment. The issue wasn't critical yet, but could potentially escalate. The safe choice would be to abort the demonstration. The bold choice would be to continue, demonstrating the vehicle's ability to complete mission objectives even under suboptimal conditions. "We'll continue with modified parameters," Sullivan decided. "Lieutenant, reduce speed on left turns to minimize stress on that track assembly." "Roger that," Daniels acknowledged, adjusting his driving accordingly. They completed the final phase successfully despite the mechanical issue, bringing the Wildcat back to the staging area where Sergeant Wilkins waited with his technical team. Left track assembly showing thermal stress, Sullivan reported as they powered down the vehicle. Possible bearing failure or alignment issue. Wilkins nodded. We'll check it immediately, sir. As Sullivan and Daniels exited the vehicle, they were approached by the assembled observers, led by General Harrington. Impressive demonstration, Captain, Harrington commended, particularly the adaptive tactics in the urban scenario. Thank you, sir, Sullivan acknowledged. The Wildcat's maneuverability allows for tactical options not available with larger platforms. Colonel Reynolds joined them, his expression suggesting grudging recognition. The vehicle performed better than anticipated, particularly in restricted terrain, though the track issue at the end raises reliability concerns. Any vehicle can experience mechanical issues, Colonel, Sullivan responded professionally. The key is designing systems that allow mission completion despite suboptimal conditions, as the Wildcat demonstrated today. Senator Daniels approached, having observed the entire demonstration with evident interest. Captain Sullivan, Lieutenant, he acknowledged both men. A compelling performance. The urban operations capabilities were particularly noteworthy. Thank you, Senator, Sullivan replied. Those environments represent exactly the scenarios where the Wildcat concept offers unique advantages. As the technical teams began their post-demonstration analysis, Sullivan found himself drawn into separate conversations with various officials, each bringing their particular perspective to the Wildcat's performance. Throughout, he maintained consistent emphasis on the vehicle's practical, tactical applications, rather than theoretical debates about armor philosophy. Later that afternoon, the principal project stakeholders gathered in the conference room for the formal assessment briefing. Technical data from the demonstration was presented alongside cumulative performance metrics from all previous testing. Colonel Reynolds presented his team's evaluation, which proved more balanced than Sullivan had anticipated. The Wildcat achieves its stated design objectives in terms of mobility, transportability, and cost profile, Reynolds acknowledged. Its performance in restricted terrain exceeds any comparable platform in current inventory, and the weapons integration is more effective than preliminary assessments suggested. He paused before continuing. However, protection limitations remain a significant concern for deployment in high-intensity conflict zones, and reliability factors require further evaluation, particularly regarding the track assembly issue observed today. Dr. Winters addressed the protection concerns with professional confidence. The armor system provides optimized protection against the most probable threats the Wildcat's intended operational environment. Complete immunity from anti-tank weapons would require weight additions that would compromise the vehicle's core mobility advantages. The technical discussion continued with Lieutenant Daniels presenting the transmission and drive system performance data, while Sergeant Wilkins reported on maintenance requirements and field serviceability. Throughout, Sullivan observed Jenkins from State Department taking extensive notes, occasionally exchanging glances with General Harrington during key points of the discussion. Their unspoken communication suggested shared understanding of implications beyond the technical details being presented. As the briefing concluded, General Harrington addressed the group. Based on the comprehensive testing completed in today's successful demonstration, I am recommending the Wildcat project advance to limited production phase. 20 vehicles for extended field evaluation by selected units, with production decision to follow based on operational assessment. Colonel Reynolds nodded acceptance of this approach. A reasonable next step, General. My team will continue monitoring the technical refinements required before production commences. The meeting adjourned with a sense of qualified success. The Wildcat had proven its concept, navigated the gauntlet of official scrutiny, and secured advancement to the next development phase. Yet Sullivan sensed unresolved tensions beneath the professional consensus, particularly in Reynolds' too-easy acceptance of the project's continuation. His suspicions were confirmed when Rodriguez intercepted him in the corridor outside. "We need to talk," the intelligence officer murmured. "Not here, the usual place. 2 hours." Before Sullivan could respond, they were interrupted by Senator Daniels approaching with his son. "Captain Sullivan," the senator greeted him. "A moment before I depart?" Rodriguez nodded slightly to Sullivan before continuing down the corridor, leaving Sullivan with the senator and Lieutenant Daniels. "I wanted to inform you personally of my decision to support continued funding for the Wildcat program," Senator Daniels stated without preamble. Today's demonstration confirmed its potential value, particularly for our allies facing Soviet-supplied adversaries. I'm pleased to hear that, Senator, Sullivan replied. The vehicle fills an important capability gap in our tactical spectrum. Indeed, the senator glanced at his son. Marcus has contributed significantly to the project's success, I understand. Lieutenant Daniel's engineering expertise has been invaluable, Sullivan confirmed honestly. The transmission modifications in particular were critical to the vehicle's performance reliability. The lieutenant appeared genuinely pleased by this acknowledgement. Thank you, sir. It's been an educational assignment. Well, the senator concluded, I must return to Washington. The Appropriations Committee meets next week, and I intend to make a strong case for the Wildcat's continuation. He extended his hand to Sullivan. Good luck with the remainder of the project, Captain, and enjoy your son's baseball game this weekend. Some things are more important than military technology, after all. The reference to Michael's game again triggered Sullivan's wariness, though the senator's tone seemed genuinely supportive rather than threatening. Thank you, Senator. I intend to be there. After the Daniels departed, Sullivan sought out General Harrington, finding him in his office reviewing the day's reports. Enter, Harrington called in response to Sullivan's knock. Ah, Captain Sullivan. Excellent work today. The demonstration exceeded expectations. Thank you, sir. The team performed admirably despite attempts to sabotage the vehicle. Harrington's expression sharpened. Explain. Sullivan outlined the discovery of metal filings in the transmission system, along with Sergeant Wilkins's corrective actions. This represents the third confirmed sabotage attempt, General. At what point do we officially acknowledge and investigate these incidents? Harrington considered the question carefully. Your concern is valid, Captain, but officially acknowledging sabotage would trigger security protocols that might compromise certain aspects of the project. He hesitated before continuing. Sometimes allowing adversaries to believe they're succeeding yields valuable intelligence about their methods and objectives. With respect, sir, these aren't just intelligence games. Real people are at risk, and a valuable military technology is being endangered for purposes that remain unclear to those of us actually developing it. Harrington studied Sullivan thoughtfully. You've performed exceptionally well in a complex situation, Captain. Your focus on the Wildcat's legitimate military applications has been exactly what the project needed. He paused. Perhaps you deserve greater clarity about the broader context. I believe I do, sir. Harrington nodded, coming to a decision. The Wildcat project serves multiple national security objectives. Its primary purpose is indeed developing a valuable tactical vehicle for U.S. forces and our allies, but it also functions as a controlled channel for identifying foreign technology theft networks. Through deliberate exposure of modified technical data, Sullivan surmised. Precisely. Dr. Winters has been instrumental in this aspect, creating armor formulations that appear advanced, but contain subtle flaws recognizable only to us. Harrington leaned forward. But there's a third dimension you are not aware of. The Wildcat's development has uncovered evidence of defense contractor espionage against competing programs, potentially compromising multiple Pentagon projects. Colonel Reynolds? Sullivan asked, the pieces falling into place. Not directly, Harrington clarified, but certain members of his team have connections to contractors competing for the XM1 program. Their attempts to undermine the Wildcat are motivated by corporate interests rather than legitimate security concerns. The full scope of the situation began to clarify in Sullivan's mind. So the project is simultaneously developing legitimate military technology, conducting counterintelligence against foreign powers, and exposing domestic corporate espionage. An accurate summary, Harrington confirmed, which explains the unusual oversight structure and operational security measures. Sullivan absorbed this information, recognizing its significance for his own position within the project. What happens next, sir? The Wildcat will proceed to limited production as announced. 20 vehicles will be built for field evaluation, incorporating the refinements identified during our testing. Harrington paused. Your role in this next phase will depend partially on your own preference, Captain. Your expertise would be valuable in overseeing the field trials, but I understand you have family considerations. The implicit acknowledgement of Sullivan's commitment to his son was unexpected. I appreciate that, sir. I'd like to continue with the project, but with a more regularized schedule that allows for family time. I believe that can be arranged, Harrington agreed. The most intense phase of development is complete. The field trials will occur over months rather than weeks, allowing for a more sustainable deployment rhythm. As Sullivan departed headquarters, the setting sun cast long shadows across the facility. The Wildcat sat in the maintenance bay, its compact form embodying both innovative military thinking and the complex web of interests that surrounded modern weapons development. His thoughts were interrupted by Rodriguez approaching, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Our meeting's still on, Captain?" "I just spoke with General Harrington," Sullivan replied. "He provided considerable clarity about the project's multiple dimensions." Rodriguez nodded. "Good, then we can skip the cloak and dagger at the diner and speak directly." He glanced around before continuing, quietly. "We've identified the primary saboteur among Reynolds' team. He's being allowed to operate under surveillance to map his network, but won't be permitted to cause further damage." "And the corporate espionage angle?" "Evidence is being compiled for Justice Department action after the Wildcat enters production. Several defense contracts will face significant legal consequences." Rodriguez examined his cigarette. "Your role has been crucial, Captain. Navigating the technical, military, and intelligence aspects of this project while maintaining its core integrity hasn't been easy." Sullivan appreciated the acknowledgement. "The vehicle itself has merit. That made the rest worthwhile." Rodriguez nodded agreement. "Speaking of merit, you should know that Reynolds' final report, despite his public reservations, actually recommends accelerated development of the Wildcat concept for special operations applications. Apparently, our demonstration changed his professional assessment, whatever his other loyalties might be. This was welcome news, validating the technical team's efforts beyond the intelligence game surrounding them. That's good to hear. The Wildcat deserves to be judged on its actual capabilities." "It will be," Rodriguez assured him. "The intelligence aspects of the project were always secondary to developing a legitimate tactical vehicle. Sometimes good cover operations require genuine achievements." As promised, Sullivan departed Fort Hood the following day to attend Michael's championship baseball game. The temporary leave from the project's complications felt like emerging from deep water into clear air. The baseball diamond bustled with activity when he arrived, players warming up, while parents and supporters filled the bleachers. Sullivan spotted Linda in the stands, her expression brightening with genuine pleasure when she saw him. "You made it," she said as he joined her. "Michael's been watching the parking lot between warm-up pitches." "Wouldn't have missed it," Sullivan replied, feeling the weight of the past week's tensions beginning to lift. "How's he doing?" "Nervous but excited. They're playing the defending champions." Linda studied him. "You look tired, Jack." "Complex project," he admitted, "but it's under control now. I'll be able to come home more regularly going forward." Their conversation paused as Michael spotted his father from the field. The boy's face lit up with a smile that erased any doubt Sullivan might have harbored about his decision to prioritize this game over project responsibilities. Michael pitched superbly, his natural talent honed by hours of practice. Sullivan watched with paternal pride as his son struck out batters with a maturity of technique that belied his 12 years. Between innings, Sullivan found himself contemplating the contrast between this sunlit field of childhood competition and the shadowy world of military development he'd been immersed in. Both had rules and objectives, victories and defeats, but the transparency of baseball, its straightforward contest of skill and effort, held a purity that Sullivan found himself valuing more deeply after the Byzantine complexities of the Wildcat project. Michael's team won the championship in a close contest, with his pitching proving decisive in the final innings. The joy on his son's face as teammates lifted him onto their shoulders provided Sullivan with a moment of clarity about his own priorities, a reaffirmation of what truly mattered beyond professional achievements and military necessity. Later that evening, as they celebrated with pizza at home, Sullivan received a call from General Harrington. "Sorry to interrupt your family time, Captain," Harrington said when Sullivan answered. "I thought you'd want to know that the Secretary of Defense has approved the Wildcat's advancement to production prototype phase with accelerated timeline." "That's excellent news, sir," Sullivan responded, genuinely pleased for the team's success. "Your final assessment report was instrumental in the decision," Harrington continued. "The Secretary was particularly impressed by your analysis of the vehicle's tactical applications in restricted terrain environments." "The Wildcat's performance spoke for itself, General. I just documented what we observed. Nevertheless, your advocacy made a difference." Harrington paused. "I also wanted to inform you that your request for reassignment to Fort Sam Houston has been approved. You'll continue overseeing the Wildcat field trials, but from a position allowing you to live at home." Sullivan felt profound gratitude for this unexpected accommodation. "Thank you, sir. That means a great deal to my family." "You've earned it, Captain. This project required exceptional dedication under challenging circumstances." Harrington's tone warmed slightly. "Enjoy your son's victory. We'll speak Monday when you return. After hanging up, Sullivan rejoined his family at the table, where Michael was enthusiastically recounting key moments from the game. Linda noticed Sullivan's expression and raised an eyebrow in silent question. Good news, he explained. I'll be transferred to Fort Sam Houston, home every night. Her eyes widened in surprise and hope. Really? For how long? Indefinitely, Sullivan confirmed. I'll continue working on the project, but from here. The joy in her expression matched what he'd seen on Michael's face after the victory, reminding Sullivan that personal triumphs could be as meaningful as professional ones, perhaps more so. 3 months later, Sullivan stood at Fort Hood once more, watching as the first production prototype of the Wildcat rolled off the assembly line. The vehicle had evolved slightly from their original test model, incorporating refinements from the development process, but remained true to the core concept of mobility, simplicity, and tactical flexibility. General Harrington presided over the ceremony marking this milestone, with key project personnel gathered to witness the achievement. Sergeant Wilkins beamed with professional pride as the engine started perfectly on the first attempt. Lieutenant Daniels, recently promoted to captain, nodded in satisfaction as the vehicle demonstrated the transmission improvements he had designed. Dr. Winters observed with professional interest her contributions to the armor system having proven decisive in the vehicle's success. 20 production prototypes will enter field service next month, Harrington announced to the assembled group. Operational evaluation will continue for 1 year, with full production decision to follow. Sullivan felt genuine satisfaction as he inspected the completed vehicle. Despite the intelligence complications and corporate intrigues that had surrounded its development, the Wildcat represented something tangible and valuable, a new capability for American forces and their allies, born from innovative thinking and persistent development despite multiple obstacles. Later, as the formal ceremonies concluded, Sullivan found himself alone with the Wildcat, running his hand along its angular hull in a gesture of farewell. His direct involvement with the project was concluding as it transitioned to operational testing, though he would continue consulting on tactical employment doctrine. She turned out well, came Sergeant Wilkins' voice as the veteran NCO approached. Better than I expected when we started. Thanks to your expertise, Sullivan acknowledged. That engine purrs like a satisfied cat. Wilkins smiled at the compliment. Heard you're heading home to San Antonio permanently. Family must be pleased. Very much so, Sullivan confirmed. Michael's baseball team is entering a new season, and I'll be able to attend every game. Good, Wilkins said with simple approval. Some victories matter more than others, sir. The wisdom in the sergeant's statement resonated deeply with Sullivan. Throughout his career, he had served his country with dedication, but too often at the cost of family connections. The Wildcat project, for all its complications, had paradoxically helped him recognize the need for balance between professional duty and personal commitments. As Sullivan prepared to depart Fort Hood, Rodriguez appeared for a final conversation. The intelligence aspects of the project were successful, the agent reported quietly. 3 foreign technology theft networks identified and neutralized. 2 defense contractor espionage operations exposed, all while developing a legitimately valuable tactical vehicle. A rare alignment of multiple objectives, Sullivan observed. Indeed, Rodriguez offered his hand. It was an honor working with you, Captain. Your integrity under complex circumstances was exceptional. Just doing my job, Sullivan replied modestly, accepting the handshake. Though I never expected vehicle development to involve quite so many layers of intrigue. The world's rarely as straightforward as we might wish, Rodriguez philosophized. But occasionally, good people navigating complex situations produce outcomes that serve genuine national interests rather than merely institutional ones. Sullivan nodded agreement, finding wisdom in the observation. The Wildcat will serve soldiers well. That makes the complications worthwhile. The sun was setting as Sullivan drove away from Fort Hood for the final time, the Wildcat project transitioning from development to operational reality behind him. Ahead lay home, family, and professional responsibilities that would allow him to serve both country and loved ones without the painful compromises that had characterized much of his military career. Fort Benning, Georgia, present day. And that, gentleman, Colonel Jack Sullivan concluded, is the story of the Wildcat Mark III. It never entered full production, but the 20 evaluation vehicles served in various classified operations throughout the 1980s. Its influence on later light armored vehicle development was significant, though largely unacknowledged in official histories. The young officers gathered around the small tank in the museum corner, listened with rapt attention. Their earlier skepticism transformed into professional interest. "What happened to the people involved, sir?" Lieutenant Pearson asked. "General Harrington and the others?" Sullivan smiled at the question. General Harrington retired as a three-star, though his most significant contributions to national security remain classified. Lieutenant Daniels eventually became General Daniels, commanding the 1st Armored Division during Desert Storm. Dr. Winters continued her research, developing armor systems that later protected our vehicles in Iraq and Afghanistan. "And Sergeant Wilkins?" Sullivan's expression softened. "Raymond Wilkins remained the finest mechanic I ever knew. We stayed friends until his passing last year at 93, still complaining about modern engines being too complicated right to the end." One of the younger officers studied the Wildcat thoughtfully. "It's strange to think something so small would have such strategic significance, sir." "Size isn't always the determining factor of importance, Lieutenant," Sullivan replied. "In vehicles or in military operations, sometimes the smallest platforms perform the most crucial missions precisely because they can access spaces others cannot." As the group prepared to continue their tour, one officer lingered behind. "Colonel Sullivan, forgive me for asking, but your son Michael, did he follow you into the service?" Sullivan smiled with paternal pride. Not exactly. That baseball talent led to college, then medical school. He's Dr. Sullivan now, chief of surgery at Walter Reed. Saves soldiers in his own way." "And you, sir?" another officer inquired respectfully. "Do you consider the Wildcat your most significant contribution?" Sullivan considered the question thoughtfully. "Professionally, perhaps. It represented innovation against institutional resistance, tactical thinking overcoming bureaucratic obstacles." He paused. "But personally, my greatest achievement was learning to balance duty to country with commitment to family. The Wildcat Project taught me that lesson at a critical moment." As they moved towards the next exhibit, Sullivan cast a final glance at the small tank that had played such a pivotal role in his career and personal development. The Wildcat stood silent now, its contributions largely forgotten except by those who had been directly involved. Yet its legacy lived on in the tactical doctrines it had influenced and in the life lessons its development had imparted. Some of history's most significant warriors, Sullivan reflected, were those whose contributions remained hidden from public view, acknowledged only by those who understood their true impact. The Wildcat had been such a warrior, small in stature but outsized in influence, much like the men and women who had brought it into existence against formidable obstacles. In that realization lay the true legacy of the Wildcat Mark III, not merely as an innovative military vehicle, but as a testament to the principle that genuine value often emerged from navigating complex challenges with integrity and determination. It was a lesson Sullivan had carried through the remainder of his military career and into the years beyond, a steel legacy forged in the heat of professional trial and personal growth. "Colonel," called Lieutenant Pearson from the next exhibit, "would you share your insights on the M1 Abrams development as well?" The museum notes mention significant controversy during its early testing phases. Sullivan smiled and moved to join the young officers, ready to share another chapter from the complex history of American armored warfare, continuing the transmission of experience and wisdom that represented the true continuity of military service across generations. Behind him, the Wildcat remained in its corner, small but significant, a physical embodiment of the principle that sometimes the most consequential contributions came in unexpected forms and from unlikely sources, their true importance visible only to those with the perspective to appreciate the complete story behind their creation.